we are officially back online, and we are 12 minutes delayed for Bill, of all sections, Bill, you're the one. So we are going to do the best that we can to ensure that we get back on time. Do we have, I don't have Mario, and I don't, oh, Larry's here, and Mario's in the back. Okay, so we have everyone. Marissa is now on this side, so I'll just have to look there and not look there. But Marissa, unless you're okay with it, I'm just going to turn it over to Bill. All right, Bill, you're going to lead us in our permanent supportive housing discussion.
Thank you so much. And
Thank
as
you.
Katie's getting the PowerPoint slides up on the screen, I just wanted to say, thank you for, making this, a topic today for this retreat. It's always nice to be able to kind of hear your comments and have a little bit more of a straight discussion than we can during the board meetings themselves. It's going to be today we're going to mainly talk about permanent supportive housing, but we do have I'm going to give you some updates also on the housing stability for school children, as well as the work I've been doing with Ron, his interest around employment services for permanent supportive housing residents. And then Melissa and I have kind of the last slide. We kind of jump in some ways to talking about a proposed pilot that we're working on to be able to incentivize the installation of standby generators in permanent supportive housing and elderly developments. So we'll be talking about that. So Katie? So again, today I thought based on where we are, it truly has been an evolution since the early 2000s as to really developing a strategic plan based on stakeholders' advocacy, really learning what the needs are for our persons with special needs and homeless households. And when we talk about permanent supportive housing, it's really talking about serving some of our most vulnerable households that we have in the state. And just to kind of talk about throughout during a phase of the evolution, we conducted a needs assessment in conjunction with state agencies and our stakeholders on what is actually the number of persons who are homeless and or have personal special needs. And it was interesting in that assessment, we also looked at what type of housing do they need. Do they just need affordable housing and access to housing with some community-based services, or do they need and require permanent supportive housing? That's really affordable housing with resident services coordination that's tied to community-based services, and really with the focus on housing stability, housing retention, and also a greater self-sufficiency. And when we looked at that number, and the assessment was completed in 2021, and we've been trying to kind of do an update every so often, it really, of all the households, about 8% of those homeless and person with special needs households needs the permanent supportive housing. And again, and that's around 12,000 individuals or families. And that's because they need just a significant wraparound services that could be intermittent, it could be long-term, or it could just be kind of a short-term as they're kind of passing through, say, from the streets. Permanent supportive housing, when they become more self-sufficient and stable, they can move on to just general housing that's affordable to them. So,
Bill?
yes.
Sorry, 8% of what group needs the permanent aspect?
Of the households in Florida that would be considered persons with special needs
Okay.
or homeless households.
Okay, so homeless households, persons with special needs, of that group, 8% of them require the permanent, okay, thank you.
And so that number was really helpful to kind of say, this is manageable. You know, you
So it's
always-
150,000 is that total group, and then you said, because you said 12,000 is
So
the,
there's, you know,
Yeah.
there's still that need for housing that's affordable
okay.
for all the populations, but those who need permanent supportive housing,
yeah,
it changes as you can imagine, but that's a kind of a good percentage to go by.
Yeah.
And it kind of follows some of the national standards and also what we've been kind of learning all along since the early 2000s. So just wanted to go over, as I said, I make some additional comments, is that what we've learned Florida Housing has, and let me also say that it's been really great, again, to have the board and staff who have helped champion this from the beginning when we decided to really look at how do we kind of expand the households that Florida Housing is serving. And that means extremely low-income households, and again, households that have special needs. And really had a lot of our stakeholders, like the Florida Supportive Housing Coalition, our state agencies, ELA advocates, kind of help us kind of learn and follow this. But I wanted to go to the second and third bullets because we want to be clear that permanent supportive housing is such that it's permanent. It's a tenancy that's based on a lease as long as the tenant complies with the lease requirements as any other household. Now there'll be, in particular, permanent supportive housing enables more services, and there's a mission to keep that household meeting their lease requirements and being stably housed as they continue to be more self-sufficient. And then the third one is the supports tenant housing stability, greater self-sufficiency, access to community-based services, activities of daily living, and inclusion in the general community through voluntary participation in on-site and community-based case management. So there's a couple points about that we learned early on that if we wanted to help to create housing stability for these very vulnerable households who, for the most part, are unstably housed or on the streets, we needed to think beyond sheltering and transitional housing. I'm not saying they're not good options, but be able to kind of get folks in stable housing and really focus on retention and also working to help them with greater self-sufficiency so they're not continuing to return to unstable housing. So those are the big things. And I think you all know this, developing and operating permanent supportive housing is very complicated, very nuanced, and it requires a qualified and experienced developer and provider with real knowledge regarding the tenants served and what those tenants need, in particular to permanent supportive housing. On-site property management and supportive services staff is a key part of permanent supportive housing, but each of those entities, management and the supportive services staff, have distinct responsibilities. Property management, tenant leasing, but then the supportive services has very distinct on providing those case-specific or household-specific services coordination, and really with the goal of getting that household integrated into the community, using the more appropriate resources instead of crisis resources and emergency resources that they've been using because, again, not being stably housed and having some behavioral health issues, acute health care issues, chronically homelessness. And, but the key point of that is the property management and the supportive services requirement, who's required to provide the supportive services that work together and in tandem to really work to serve that household again toward the housing stability and greater self-sufficiency, as well as to protect the client, protect the staff, and protect the other residents. And you all, I think, know this, many of you, is a successful permanent supportive housing. We've found out that it's the three legs of the stool. It's the capital financing, it's supportive financing and resources for supportive services and rental assistance. And often in the early days and continues, which we're continuing to try to work toward in finding a solution, is that the permanent supportive housing provider has had to, for the most part, be responsible for providing or making sure the resources are available for supportive services and rental assistance. Yes?
Bill, I just want to, because from memory, I think it was 4 years ago when we ran I don't know what it was, we ran the numbers on what it costs to permanently house people that need permanent supportive housing versus the alternative of on the street with chronic homelessness. It was sheriffs, it was emergency room visits, it was those. So initially the idea of a program that needs to be funded continuously brings pause to many, but compared to the alternative, it was a fraction of the cost.
It was, and some of the challenges that we all know that everybody deals with and has been kind of an ongoing is that the resources come from different silos.
Yeah.
So the savings that are happening in the healthcare system or locally aren't being transitioned
Right.
to the housing finance side, but as to the benefits to the community, to those public resources, even, which is interesting now with all the talk with Medicaid, is, the savings just to the state regarding Medicaid services.
Sure.
And services through Department of Children and Families and Agency for Persons with Disabilities. So what you see normally is that you have, and what our pilots and our studies have found is that you might see an increase upon, entering a supportive, permanent supportive housing development of the case management resources, primary care from the doctor, because that person's now moving from on the streets or not having coordinated resources to needing some significant wraparound case management services, housing stability services. But we find over time that all levels out, and in fact, it's cheaper from a services and community resources for that person to be stably housed, of course, and hopefully becoming employed, not being as sick, and having, so it works out. There's a little blip that we found in our studies, an increase, but then over time, it's significant.
It's significantly less than all the other services combined. It's just tough to translate that because it's not translating to our portfolio to fund it.
And that's why, as we, we started out small in the early 2000s and kind of really worked up to, like, now looking at, with our stakeholders and our permanent supportive housing providers, is a hospital can really benefit from supporting the financing or of housing or services for their publicly funded. Because there's an interesting piece is the ER cost and the ER visits just to come in, really to get off the streets a little bit and get a shower and do all that stuff instead of being able to go back to their own apartment and be doing that.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead. Finish your thought, Ryan.
I was just going to finish it before Marissa tells me not to Mario this and go down the rabbit hole of questions for it. And I might be jumping ahead on your presentation, but how many units are currently in service in this category?
I have to say thousands, and we have at this point 247 developments around the state.
So with thousands, if the total magnitude of the
I would
problem is
say-
12,000, I think that's the number you said, is 12,000. That feels, reason I'm jumping to that, of all the things that we tackle, that feels very manageable. Like 12,000 units is not a lot. Granted, it's a lot more expensive
Right.
running it with all these additional services, and it's a lot more involvement. But 12,000 is very manageable. So how solvable is this problem, and what kind of dollars are we talking to do that? But am I jumping further on in your presentation?
But I think
Well,
one,
if I could ask Ryan, the only reason why I'm asking for us to put a pin in this, one, is because I want Bill to get through his presentation.
Through
But
slide
al-
1 at least?
But right, but also, we have time at the end of the agenda, and I was gonna ask if we could parking lot and just have a deeper discussion towards the end on, not just for PSH, but what does our entire portfolio look like as the feds sort of move away from the housing first model, and as the feds sort of put much stricter parameters around different voucher programs. Again, I don't want to answer that now. I want to parking lot that for the end of the day, but I think that's certainly relevant and topical. This is what triggered it, follows the housing first model, and you might want to get rid of that because no one's doing that anymore. But I think it would just be helpful, at least before we leave, for us to have a larger conversation on what our entire portfolio looks like with those two very dramatic changes at the federal level. And so I only said that because you can answer that question, Ryan's question now, though a week from now, a month from now, that could be a completely different response if the feds continue to go down this path of dramatically changing parameters around all of these systems of care.
It could. And that's kind of one of the reasons why, starting early on with looking at permanent supportive housing is we also looked at our existing programs, both on in the single-family housing and multifamily rental housing. What do we already finance, and where can we incorporate requirements, incentives to help ELI households, persons with special needs, homeless households to greater access what we have. So that was everything from developing kind of accessibility, visitability, and universal design features into all of our developments, as well as having a ELI set aside for many of our multifamily developments, and it's normally about 10% of the total units, to even developing, which is a nationally kind of accepted and used set of standards now as to aging in place requirements and standards. Because again, the whole thing is also of helping to transition eligible persons from institutions and higher levels of care where they don't need it if they had stable housing with services, but they certainly don't need $8,000 a month care or $12,000 of public resources. To just looking at how do we lower barriers to entry in the application and selection process. So and luckily, with the help of our stakeholders and even really our development community, have been fantastic overall in kind of accepting these and helping us work through these. Katie? And again, I think we talked about it, just be a little, just talking about the defined term in statute. Persons with special needs is an adult person who requires independent living services in order to maintain housing and develop independent living skills, and who has a disabling condition. And a disabling condition ranges from persons with mental illness to persons with physical disabilities to persons with developmental disabilities, and kind of the whole range, including autism. Autism was added to the persons with developmental disabilities about 6 years ago as a category under IDD. And these again are really, the intended persons are really those most vulnerable citizens who are high utilizers of resources that may not be appropriate because of their housing instability or their needs. And then we also have the households who are homeless, but again, focusing with permanent supportive housing, the focus is on those persons with special needs that are at risk of homelessness or are homeless, not the total homeless population that may just be economically homeless. That's kind of another model, but may not need the permanent supportive housing. So it's just some of the types of persons that permanent supportive housing serves, and it may be an individual or their family. Is a person with mental illness and acute health care needs that has been chronically homeless for a long time. Homeless veterans with disabilities is also a big one. Individuals who have aged out of foster care and have become homeless. We see not maybe as much anymore, but our providers have seen and we've seen where kids grew up in foster care, maybe just group homes. Many of them will have special needs also, you know, autism, mental illness, and they have never really been in stable housing. It's, they've went from foster care and not stable foster care out to the streets and never had any of the skills and things like that related to what you would hope that, you know, all of our children would have the opportunity to. Next slide. And I won't go over these, you know, permanent supportive housing, you know, priorities. I think they're, you know, we've talked about them over the years. I want to just kind of add this slide for kind of our newer board members. And again, it's all related to help these persons with special needs become stably housed, keep their housing, and integrate in the community properly and be able to kind of meet their goals like any other household. Next slide. So I just wanted to talk, like we wanted to talk about evolution because of permanent supportive housing, because we're coming at it to one of those phases. We're kind of at a crossroads regarding that. We've spent all this time kind of developing the concepts, doing all the research, as I said, integrating as much as we can into our existing programs, looking at different housing models because one size does not fit, understanding, you know, the needs of persons with special needs in homeless households, those very general needs, affordable housing that's affordable to them, access to services coordination, and greater integration into the community. But then looking at what is kind of one of the most challenging things is the needs of different demographic groups. The needs of a person with developmental disabilities and intellectual deficits may be much different than the needs of a household that has survived domestic violence and are, working to kind of get back into a more secure life and everything in between. So you really have to kind of focus on the intended resident and the households and who you're serving and how do you do that.
Bill, I want to just quickly acknowledge you and the team. Having a permanent supportive housing plan, I think, is fantastic. I know that with all of these special populations, there is a group of very passionate advocates that want a bigger piece of the pie, understandably. I sit in meetings all the time where whether it's formerly homeless, or it's IDD, or it's youth aging out of foster care, or it's seniors, we always hear people say, how can we not have enough resources? How can we live in a world where, a pregnant mother has to live in her car because she's homeless? And so, our resources are not infinite. And so I very much appreciate staff being able to have that sort of measured plan throughout the year and helping advocates understand that while we want to invest deeper into each of these special populations, our resources are limited. And when you try and pit one special population against another, you realize that at the end of the day, anyone with any kind of conscience doesn't want any of these special populations to not have access to housing, but we are still somewhat limited to the resources that are not only allocated to us by the legislature, but also above and beyond that we are able to appropriate those resources in a manner that provides opportunity for all special populations to be able to benefit from those funds.
That is just an excellent way to kind of summarize that, and we're always playing because we can't advocate. We look at kind of cross-person special needs and figure out how to kind of address those. As I said, that's kind of the needs for all folks around affordable housing, but also then digging into those specific needs of households. And it really kind of depends who are also advocating for these groups based on the resource. But we try to stay as, kind of equal as possible and just continue to kind of push it down the road. And that's kind of one of the things that we're working on, again, is kind of, we've learned very quickly that in serving these individuals, just having them go through the door in an apartment isn't usually successful. They need the services, they need the coordinators, they need even help to find the housing and to get into the housing and apply for the housing. And maybe for the first month or two, some of our providers are, we've learned through our pilots and stuff, some of our providers are going out every night and going out to the individual and saying, hey, remember you have an apartment here, it's not a shelter, and you didn't miss the 6 o'clock timeline, to get to the shelter, it's your apartment. So it becomes that, in many ways, it's that basic of the situation. But
I wanted to, sorry, Bill, I didn't want to cut you off. It's Marissa. Just because we started a little bit, 10 minutes late, we're going to give some more time, but just to keep us, to get through the next few slides and some conversation, but we are going to push out since we started
Everything
later.
else will parking lot,
Yeah.
we'll bring it up at the end.
And I hope, again, because of the interest that the staff see of the board regarding, serving these households, is that I'm hoping in the future, as we kind of talk about the next steps and where we are in the evolution of permanent supportive housing, is that we can come back and maybe do more of a presentation and bring some of our stakeholders and our providers back, if that would be interest. But I wanted to show you this. This is in your package. It's a 2-page document. And what it is just to kind of show all that we have been doing since really 2006. And it kind of shows as to the activities, the initiatives, what the legislature has done, how we've kind of moved through the years and the stages to this point. Katie?
This is great.
So it just kind of gives, it's not a full, but it kind of gives an overview of how we try to be very intentional from our research, from kind of the level of sophistication, the resources available. The other thing, as Sandra said, is finite resources. The other thing that we always kind of struggle to help our providers out are that maybe the finite resources in the services side and also in the rental assistance side. And we, with the stakeholders, have worked on that as kind of officially as late as 2023, when Governor DeSantis asked Florida Housing to staff and be a member of a permanent supportive housing work group. And it was kind of as an ask from the Florida Supportive Housing Coalition, but it was a short-term work group with state agencies and Florida Housing could kind of look at how do we figure out how to better collaborate all our resources to make this happen and be more of a seamless kind of flow of resources. So it's not always different from community to county to the capacity of, say, the supportive housing provider. So this is just talking about really when a lot of the things started happening around permanent supportive housing. The legislature really got interested, provided funding for Florida Housing to develop 3 models of supportive housing for persons with developmental disabilities, provided grant funding that we could use individually or pair with our other resources to build the housing. We worked with all the stakeholders, and it was kind of unique because we were talking about licensed, in many cases, licensed community residential homes of 6 persons or less with Medicaid's residential rehabilitation program with APD. So we had to develop the RFA and the requirements of the setting for all our models. So home and community-based services under Medicaid and other resources at the federal level, that if their consumers had those resources to help them stay in the community, they had to approve the setting. So we had to kind of develop all of our housing resources to meet those federal home and community-based services so they could get the resources in the home. So this was a time where we really started learning a lot and starting to bring more resources and make permanent supportive housing a very specific model. In between 2018 and up to now, we've learned more lessons I've learned, and we've been kind of tuning up everything from our application selection process, including impact scoring, which has been of interest, to the board and the stakeholders for the last couple years or so. And we've really learned, because the key point of this phase of the evolution was that some of the finance permanent supportive housing developments had now come into operations. So we now weren't just guessing what happens when they open the doors. We were now actually evaluating and assessing how successful, what were the challenges, what were the best practices. And once this happened, we actually went into the next stage of the policy unit, created a very kind of standard, kind of comprehensive site review evaluation of developments that were at least a year in operation so far since 2022, I believe, Zach. We've done 17 of those, and we'll continue to do those. We have learned a lot, as you can imagine, through that. We've learned what works, what doesn't work, what are good practices, where maybe somebody didn't realize at application what they were getting into until they opened their doors, things like that. So this has been really where we've kind of learned a lot specifically about what we're doing around permanent supportive housing and where we need to go. Katie. So this, I just want to point out a few things. Our next phase started this year. And again, thinking about what the board has talked to with us, what we've learned, our stakeholder input, we're having want to do continued effort and emphasis on evaluating and addressing the best practices, as well as challenges, especially in the management and operation. Because really at this point, we're not only looking to best serve or serve in the best way these intended households, but we're also looking to utilize and be good stewards of our public resources, but also in many ways we've learned that also we can do things from education, technical assistance, and other things to protect our supportive housing providers and our developers. Right now I'm working, and my team are working with Melissa and her team to look at developing ideas and proposing changes to the application selection criteria and process. We're going to be, from what we've learned, we're going to be focusing on more of requiring that we can see that there's actual real partnerships out there, that the organizations have the capacity that they need, and what do they have and what is needed for them to be successful and long-term permanent supportive housing providers. So we'll be continuing to come back to you as we develop those things and looking at our next steps in tandem with the corporation's strategic planning process. We also have the permanent supportive housing plan that's in conjunction with that, but ours is the permanent supportive plan is more kind of down and kind of real practical about you'll do this in this amount of time and then you move on to the next activity. So, and I apologize for rushing through this, but again, with permanent supportive housing, there's just so much to cover. Next, Katie. Just quickly, Housing Stability for School Children program. We have done our due diligence with the school districts and PHAs in counties of up to 400,000, and through our due diligence and conceptual workshops, we feel comfortable there's enough interest out there to be able to issue another RFA in the fall, if the board approves, to bring in at least 3 more counties. Of course, that funding is through, in David's shop, the federal home funding for rental assistance. We also worked really diligently for the last year to bring, if you remember, last fall, two counties, Santa Rosa and Bay County, one of the partners decided that they didn't want to continue the program. We worked really diligently. Tomorrow you'll have an action item about providing funding to Santa Rosa County, as we were able to bring them back in with a lot of work with the Milton Housing Authority, the public officials and the commissioners in Milton and Santa Rosa County. So we're really pleased to bring them back in the fold, and we're working with the school district, Bay County. So we will, in the next several months, with David's help and his staff, will be coming to you with a number of action items. And with working with Ron, we were kind of, Ron was interested in, as he's looking at permanent supportive housing, is employment services for persons with, special needs, especially persons with developmental disabilities, including autism. And what are our providers doing to work with everybody from the statewide career source to local programs? So Ron, at Ron's invitation, I joined Ron to speak with Secretary Kelly at Commerce to talk about their employment services, and we're doing a study right now for him to show what's happening out there and where those resources may be enhanced for permanent supportive housing providers and those residents. And I will pass, I'll discuss the last item in a future board meeting. It's real exciting what we're doing with that pilot as the units come online. And Katie, last but
Well, again, can we also, just going back for a second for that last one, can we parking lot that item for the end of the day in context to the new federal EO for homelessness?
You talking about the school children program?
No, I'm
or
talking about the high utilizers of public behavior resources.
I guess, because I want to talk about school children too, but we'll have the opportunity, I think, tomorrow at the board meeting to talk about that as well, right? Because, I mean, I know it's specific to Santa Rosa tomorrow, but if
In
we're running
general.
short on time, if we can put that last, and if we need to roll it to
So
tomorrow,
no, we could
already
put,
have the
yeah,
venue.
let's put that on the parking lot for later on today. And if
Yeah.
we don't, then tomorrow, that's fine.
I'll second that. I like that, hear more about the stability of school children.
Same.
Okay.
And then the last item
Bill was
is,
so excited, for so engaged in this. Keep going, Bill. You won everyone over.
sometimes I get a little too passionate, sorry. The last is a proposed pilot to incentivize built elderly and permanent supportive housing developments to install generators. What I'll tell you about this, and Melissa, please jump in. Multifamily and policy are working on, this is pretty much the last group of developments where, as we started in 2024 RFA and now are continuing, where there's a requirement for generators to be installed in Florida Housing Finance developments starting in the elderly and permanent supportive housing RFAs in 2024, 25, and now we're proposing a requirement that for all developments that are financed in starting in 2025, 2026.
Sorry, to clarify, all developments for permanent supportive housing and elder, not every multifamily.
Would be including,
Every project in our portfolio have a generator?
Those that are financed in this cycle moving forward, that would be one of the property features that would be required is a standby generator.
Can-
Last year, we did it for elderly and special needs developments, and this year we propose to do it for all of them.
So the opportunity to talk about this?
yes.
And it has been publicly workshopped as well.
Okay.
So the developer community knows that, and they've experienced it last year, like Melissa said, with all elderly, but they know that that's
That's
coming.
fascinating. I've not gotten a single phone
I have
call
some,
about
I have some opinions and questions on
All right,
that.
so-
When would be the appropriate
Yeah,
time?
I'm adding that to the parking lot.
Okay.
Generator.
I better hang out in that parking lot. So, and again, this focus would be a pilot that we would be proposing to the board for funding, where we would incentivize this by providing grant funding to assist with the purchase of the generator and the installation, where our focus, and there's some legislative kind of advocacy for this also, and, you know, especially around the elderly and permanent supportive housing developments, we've also seen where those developments that have generators have really been able to stay put as much as they could during say a hurricane, after a hurricane, and not have to go to special shelters. We've already incorporated and did the pilot with the community residential homes for persons with DD, and we're proposing it to do it now for the larger elderly and permanent supportive housing developments.
Madam Chair?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I just want to follow up.
Look at me.
Into the mic,
I got my own.
Okay, and just closer to the mic.
You still weren't close enough.
You should need to jerk back and say, oh, wow, I'm so
Did my
loud.
job.
I need to be taller.
No.
That's been my problem all along. Anyways, time is up. The reason that I contacted Secretary Kelly is I actually toured a lot of our projects that are funded and found out how important job training. Oh, wow.
See, because now when you look both ways, she can actually hear you for it.
Oh. Anyways, how important jobs and job training is. A few years ago, there was a nonprofit in the Orlando area, collecting private funds to do job training for special needs young adults. And I saw how important that was because they got $1 million, which I also advocated for with the legislature, to train young adults how to fix cell phones. And finding out that there was like 25,000 cell phone repair jobs available in the nation that are not being, they have nobody to fill them. And so by doing that, I realized that that's why I toured some of our projects to find out how important job training and jobs are to making these projects work. So that's when I instigated a conversation with Secretary Kelly and then brought Bill in with a meeting that we had, a virtual meeting, and he's very supportive of whatever they can do. And I asked Secretary Kelly to find out if there's any resources or anything we can do to provide these services to our projects. And he asked Bill to put together some information of which he's doing now. And Commerce is very supportive of doing those kind of things to help us out. And I just wanted to mention one more thing real quick. For every board member and every staff member for Florida Housing, if you haven't been to one of these projects, okay, and actually seen what they're actually doing to actually develop job training and jobs, and it makes you feel really proud that you're involved in this process, whether it be from the board level or from staff level. It really makes me, and I'm sure everybody else, feel real good about what we're doing. So I think it's extremely important.
So Ron and Bill, I'll connect you locally. I work with a nonprofit called Happy, and it's an acronym, and that's literally all that they do is they work with both employers and persons with special needs on job training. So I'm more than happy to connect you with the both of them. It's solely what they do, and I say that specifically because they're really into looking for tech jobs for persons with developmental disabilities. So I'm more than happy.
And we were kind of asking Commerce to assist and put it all together and maybe, make it easier for all of these type groups to actually get it done.
So I think it's time to move on to our next topic. And yes, Ryan?
Are we supposed to approve something for this pilot?
No, and what's actually going to happen is later this afternoon, this is a to be continued. We actually, not just parking lot, have some more discussion on this later in the agenda under the strategic planning and further discussion. So we are going to come back to this today for sure.
Okay, thanks.
Yep. Bill, Bill, good? Anything else?
Yeah, just one thing. I would be remiss without introducing Zach Summerlin, who's sitting here. Many of you know. He is our policy director and also supportive housing coordinator, and he's been just, very helpful with his background, especially regarding these issues with serving persons with special needs. He's a has a social work degree. He's worked with persons with mental health, persons that are homeless, and worked with a lot of the local agencies and the state agencies. And his last job before we were able to grab him, he was the director of the Department of Children and Families Office on Homelessness, and kind of staffed the State Council on Homelessness.
What a job.
My God.
So, thank you, Zach.
Bill, thank you very much. We appreciate that. We are now moving over. David Westcott, you are up for our home ownership program discussion.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the board. Home ownership programs. Going to start the conversation off talking about our homebuyer loan programs. So first slide, here we go. So what drives our homebuyer loan programs? It's definitely our down payment assistance. 99% of our loans have down payment assistance. So people are not coming to us just for the first mortgage. They really need the down payment assistance. And so just to give a little background, these homebuyer loan programs are the ones where we partner with participating lenders throughout the state. We have well over 200, close to 250 lenders that originate our mortgages, both the first mortgage and the second mortgage. They table fund those mortgages, so they advance all the funding. Once those loans are closed, they are then submitted to Florida Housing, to our compliance administrator and our master servicer, and only when they meet all of the loan and compliance requirements do we then purchase those loans and reimburse those lenders. So, you know, those lenders are taking a big financial risk in advancing all those funds, and we appreciate them very much. But I think we've built a level of trust with them where they know that we're going to review things fairly and quickly, and that's why these programs are so popular. So our two flagship down payment assistance programs are Hometown Heroes, which is the newest of the two, and the HAP, the Home Ownership Assistance Program. So where do we get money for these? I'll start with HAP. HAP has been around since the beginning of Sadowski. When we talk about Sadowski and trust funds now, you know, especially the state housing trust funds, you know, we're talking about sale, right? It's ship and sale, sale and ship. Well, HAP was in that conversation and a regular recipient of trust funds in the early years. So why don't we come back as often? Well, HAP has pretty much achieved the goal that the legislature set for Hometown Heroes, which is to be an evergreen program, meaning that we have made enough loans on the HAP side that we're able, through repayments, to recirculate those funds and get that money back out to new first-time homebuyers who need it. So while Hometown Heroes, we've received appropriations from the legislature, 3 years of appropriations of $100 million each, plus $36 million that we took from corporation funds and put into that program. So while we've got $336 million out on the street right now in Hometown Heroes funding, we've only received $8 million back in repayments. And that's because, why, you know, interest rates are staying high, nobody's refinancing, you know, not many people are in these 3 years moving up to their next home already. So Hometown Heroes still has a way to go to achieve the evergreen status of HAP. So there are some differences you can see. I've just put a couple of the criteria up there. Hometown Heroes can go up to 150% of the area median income, and the amount of down payment assistance is equal to 5% of the first mortgage loan amount, which has turned out to be roughly $16,000 on average. HAP is capped by statute at 120% AMI, and right now we are putting out $10,000, a flat $10,000 per loan. Ryan? Yeah.
Both of these are seconds that sit on and they do not accrue interest, so the payoff is the same when they sell, and
That's-
it never disappears. So we always get it back at some point.
That's correct. So
Okay.
it's 0% interest,
Yep.
non-amortizing, no
Yep.
payments, due upon sale, refinance, or non-owner occupancy.
Got it.
So if there's a foreclosure, we'll usually wind up having to take less,
Sure.
but that's
Because second position, but yeah, I get it. Okay.
correct.
Thank you.
Yes.
So what if somebody dies, and the heirs get it? Is that something that transfers, or we get paid off?
So the first mortgage usually dictates that. We only allow these down payment assistance programs to be used with government-insured mortgages, so Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, FHA, USDA-RD, or VA. So usually, if a borrower dies, then our master servicer, who is servicing that first mortgage loan along with our second, is using the servicing guidelines for that first mortgage to decide what happens. Is there, an heir that can take on that loan and continue to make the payments, or, are they going to help them out with a sale, a short sale if necessary? So, yeah, that's how that operates. So I'll go to a static image on the next page, but Ryan, we're going to fire up the dashboard and to be able to show you, the interactive numbers for both Hometown Heroes and HAP. But what has happened this year, as many of you are aware, is that instead of the $100 million that we've received the last 3 years in appropriation from the legislature, this year we've received $50 million for Hometown Heroes. And furthermore, that $50 million is limited to certain occupations. And we've got an action item for you tomorrow to approve that list of occupations. But, the question comes, well, how do we serve, the other folks, the folks that are first-time home buyers but are not, within those occupational requirements? And the answer, of course, is HAP. HAP is what we will turn to, as we have, utilized effectively for a number of years to serve those first-time home buyers. And it's the same thing, been to you the last 2 years. When we have had Hometown Heroes, those funds have been, fully reserved within, less than 60 days. So what have we done for the rest of the year? Well, HAP has really stepped in to fill that gap. So, Katie, are you able to bring up the...
While she's doing that,
Yes.
David, when does the $50 million start?
So we received the $50 million on July 1. Once the board tomorrow approves a final occupation list, we will conduct 2 weeks of training for our lenders based on that final list and the other requirements. And then the funds, if all of that goes according to plan, will be made available on Monday, August the 18th for the beginning of reservation.
I'm assuming that the burden of ensuring that the dollars is only going to qualified occupations is not on us, but is either on the lender or someone on the other side of it.
Correct, it's on the lender. And if you remember, before Hometown Heroes was part of Live Local, we received a $100 million appropriation, and that was occupation-based. So we do have a track record with our compliance administrator, eHousing Plus, of them verifying through verifications of employment and other documentation, making sure that occupation fit within the allowable occupations, and if it didn't, then the lender has to keep that loan. We never purchase it using the appropriated funds. So,
Are you
unfortunately,
done, or did we lose AV?
yeah.
I was like, wow, David, you win. You had the shortest and briefest
Right?
presentation. Just kidding. We can't say that just yet.
Exactly. So let me, while we're getting through this, I'll just sort of summarize. While we put $330 million out in Hometown Heroes, during the same time period, and including up until June 30th, 2022 to 2025 in HAP, we've put out over $100 million. So, what Angie's gonna, I think, show you later, and what she's been telling me is, hey, at this rate, we're gonna be out of HAP in 2027.
We talked about that 2 years ago.
Yeah. So, there a lot of things can happen. Interest rates can come down. There can be a big refinancing boom.
Can you just say that one again?
I said, yes, interest rates can come down maybe soon.
Put it out and put that energy out there in the universe. Interest rates are going to
Right.
come down. Okay.
There we go. But we're having to plan, because one of the things that Hometown Heroes did also was that there was such a big splash with it. It was so popular with home buyers, lenders, realtors, that we actually got a number of additional participating lenders who wanted to come in and use our down payment assistance programs, and a lot more loan officers, even within existing participating lenders, that became interested. So not only did Hometown Heroes fly out the door, but then utilization of HAP went up as well. So while we've used about $24, $25 million in HAP each of the last few years, here so far in 2025, we're already up to $22 million in HAP that we've utilized, and that's through June 30th. And we have the rest of the year that it will need to be used for the occupations that don't qualify for Hometown Heroes, and then when that $50 million runs out, for all occupations, all first-time home buyers that we're going to look to serve. So utilization just keeps increasing, and we're happy for that as long as we have money. So that's the big thing.
Are we putting this together with our bond
Ron,
allocation?
into the mic, into the mic, into the mic. If I can't hear you, then Pam
Are we
can't hear
putting
you.
this together with our bond allocation?
We are using it both with bonds and with what we call our TBA executions. So yes, even those loans that are bond qualified, our finance wizards over there, they will do a best execution of it. So at the end, when that loan's delivered, if it's an FHA loan and they can sell it into the specified pool market and make a larger profit than settling in the bond issue, then they'll take that path. If it's a conventional loan and they can sell it through the cash window for Fannie or Freddie, then they'll take that execution. That's all ways that we stretch our bond allocation on the single family side to make sure we're good stewards and not using more than we need to, because there's such a demand overall on the multifamily side as well. And so I'm gonna skip over to a slide on the HOP program, the homeownership pool program, not swimming pool, but different pools of funds, that is designed to stimulate new construction, and it's used mostly with our self-help partner providers, but it does use federal home funds. So the only way to use federal home funds for down payment assistance with is really for new construction, and HOP can go up to $35,000, and developers sign up, to be HOP member participants, and they, will then build those homes, reserve the HOP funds, and then these aren't construction funds, but the HOP down payment assistance will come in at the end, and as a means of down payment assistance for those home buyers who earn no more than 80% of the area median income. So we have 403 HOP homes that were built between May of 2022 and May of 2025, and 378 of those were built by Florida Habitats or other USDA RD mutual self-help sorts of builders in that. So HOP is a good way to have us partner with those folks to produce new units, and not just, as we do mostly with the Homebuyer Loan Program, finance first-time homebuyers who are purchasing existing units. How am I doing on time?
Keep going.
Okay.
You
Thank
started
you.
late and you had some
Everybody gets an
AV
extra,
issues.
yeah, everybody gets an extra 10 minutes, and you
All right.
just keep going till 2, I'd say.
Thank
Yes.
you. All right. So here is our fantastic dashboard that many of you saw previously, the Power BI dashboard that we're able to utilize for home ownership. So we've had Van and his great data management unit crew break it down further into Hometown Heroes down payment assistance and HAP down payment assistance. So what you're looking at right now is the universe of Hometown Heroes loans, which, $336 million in Hometown Heroes has leveraged over $6.6 billion in first mortgages and helped us serve almost 22,000 families throughout the state. So, and if you look at the map there, we've covered quite an area, big area of the state. And as you can see in the pie chart there, our biggest counties, Miami-Dade, Broward, Hillsborough, Palm Beach, but we've done Hometown Heroes loans in every single county of the state, even the smallest rural counties. So,
Biggest to smallest.
Question. On the card that you gave us, it says total economic impact on the state for program activity is 12.4 billion. How is that carried into that number? Is it using the 6.6 or the 335?
Is using at least all Florida housing information, so it would be the Hometown Heroes information, if I'm incorrect in that.
Looks like you're looking at me,
No,
and I
I'm not.
definitely don't have that answer.
Larry, what's the answer?
I don't know.
So you're saying that it's
But that
half?
number then,
It doesn't make sense.
I would expect that number to be a lot higher than if it was 6.6, because just Hometown Heroes would be half of that total impact.
All right.
For the record, I was looking at Kevin Tatro, who prepares the economic impact analysis, and we could put that in the
Oh, I was like, why are
parking
you
lot for
looking
this
at me,
afternoon
Marissa?
to discuss more, but I was looking between you two to
Okay,
Kevin.
So I'm in a parking lot. I'm gonna add data
It
point,
can't be.
on wallet card. Are we gonna do it now?
I know, right? Yeah. And
One more question on
Yes.
Power BI before we go into it. Does the data from Van and team carry into this as well, where we can see multifamily program information?
Yes, and we'll show you that later.
Thank you.
All right, so for economic impact stuff, I'm going to be a little wonky here because the answer gets into some details. But when I look at single-family homeownership activities, when you buy an existing home, the cost of that home has already been impacted in the state. So buying another asset that already exists, like a home, has no impact at all to the economic impact of Florida. It's just the side things like title insurance, attorneys, those things that are newly generated from the sale. So if we have, I believe, a large percentage of our home ownership activities is acquisition of existing homes. And so although we have a large portfolio of mortgages, the impact is lower than you would expect to because a lot of them is buying a current asset that already exists. You don't generate anything new with that.
Fair answer then, Kevin. What amount, if any, in the 12.4 is carried from the Hometown Heroes number?
I don't know.
Okay.
I think it would be great to know that each program, what the impact is.
But I agree with your logic. I would say
Yeah,
that it's at least the annual funding of it, plus there may be the other impact, like you said, from title real estate.
Every year we publish a economic impact study report, and they do break it out by program. I don't know if the Hometown Heroes is by itself, but I can look up it's on the website, the programs. There are many homeownership programs that can be used in one home acquisition, like the down payment and a first-time home buyer or something like that.
Got it.
And so you just can't add the impact of each program because each program builds on the other programs in that same home.
Got it.
Like multifamily, you could have 3 or 4 loans on one multifamily development. And so you can't add them together. But as a whole, each program is separated out. And I don't have access to that right now, but I know how much it does break stuff down.
If we can provide that methodology as a subsequent, but it's the same methodology that's used every year.
Yes.
Right.
So David, most of these dollars from Hometown Heroes are in resales, not so much in new construction.
That's correct. Because the time period from when a lender has to reserve the loan to when they have to deliver the loan, does not account for a construction of a new
So
home.
there's very little economic activity going on.
Well, none that we
None-
measure.
There we
right.
go. There we go.
There is economic impact too, but we don't measure that in our studies.
Right.
It's just a multiplier of the funds from that activity that go out and how they multiply out in the community.
This is more jobs and materials.
Yes, yes.
I disagree
And
a bit, Ron,
salaries.
that it doesn't have an economic impact on construction because the people, a ton of the national builders are building speculatively and just sell to end users, in which case those end users that qualify for Hometown Heroes would do it, and a new construction unit is absorbed because of that. So I don't think I think it's a number. I don't think it's negligible.
Right. And the number was mostly labor and materials.
And
Yeah,
For
But that's not
economic.
carried into
but
the
but if they're buying a homeowner spec, that's still new construction to us, I believe. But what doesn't measure is the person who sold the home to our client, they buy a new home. And so that new home is not captured in our acquisition of the existing home.
Understand.
yeah,
So-
and right.
Sorry.
Yeah, I was
And-
just going to say, but for the purpose of conversations later today, I did add to the now laundry list of parking lot issues we hope to address, data points on the wallet card.
Yeah, and Ryan, we do capture, like you said, spec homes that are new construction.
Yeah.
So I can get you guys what percentage of the loans,
Listen, I just want to
we
correct
made.
Ron.
Okay, very good. Katie, can you just very quickly show the HAP Power BI? So there's the same time period of the 336 million in Hometown Heroes. But again, if we didn't have HAP, with $100 million of down payment assistance serving over 10,000 families, then, we would really be lagging behind the need that we're seeing here in the state. So HAP is, like I said, it's one of our flagship programs, and it's really helped us serve folks from all over the state in recent years. So there is one more thing I wanted to touch on outside of the home buyer loan programs and HOP, and that is to tell you about the Home Builder New Construction Pilot Program that we had done an RFA for in 2022. So yes, after all that trouble getting the Power BI up, I don't know if, there you go, look at you. Thank you. So 2022 pilot program, which gave $1 million revolving line of construction funding to home builders, up to 25% of the purchase price from the line of credit could be left behind for the home buyer as down payment assistance. And homes were required to be built on donated lots to help reduce the purchase price of the home. So we had one successful builder come through the program, and Homes Bring Hope, they closed on their revolving loan about a year ago, and to date they have successfully constructed and sold 6 homes to eligible Floridians. And it's kind of small down there, but sales prices run from about $280,000 down to $247,000. On each of those, they chose to leave 25% of that sales price behind, so the down payment assistance amount was close to $50,000 on each one of them. And next slide, if you would, Katie. Here are some photos, and these were taken by Nicole Gibson, photographer extraordinaire, and also our director of federal loan programs, which is NHTF, HOME, all the CDBG-DR we do. And then she was also responsible for HOP and the Home Builder New Construction Pilot Program. So here were some of the homes that were built in the Daytona Beach area. And next slide, please. So the neighborhood they were built in, they were homes donated, or lots donated by the city, and so they were sort of infill lots, and show how close they were to Daytona Beach, the International Speedway, and I-95. So this was successful with one builder. There's another builder who was unable to get out of credit underwriting because they could not build the homes at an affordable level, and that builder was from the Palm Beach area. So that award was deobligated. But this, I guess in interest of time, I will just sort of gloss over this. If we want to talk more, and I know Ryan just left the room, this is something as in his area of work he's interested in as well. But Madam Chair, if we want to put this in the already crowded parking lot as well.
Yep, I'll make sure if anyone has any questions that we will bring you back for that. Yes. That was your last slide?
Would you do one more? Let me make sure. So no, just market conditions about housing starts generally on the decrease, and then the next slide is active listings on the increase. So, this was a pilot program using Florida Housing's own money. So this was for discussion if we wanted to decide where we wanted to go from here with the pilot program. One more, Katie, and then I had already skipped previously over to HOP, so that's the end of my presentation.
All right, David, thank you very much. In the
Madam
interest of
Chair?
time. Oh, go ahead. No, go ahead, Ron.
When you.
Just
go
make
over-
sure you speak into the mic.
When you go over that program again, on the houses, I want to,
You got it. Yeah, I put
Add
it on there,
something to
next step for home ownership pilot program. Any other questions? Ryan, anything burning? If not, we're going to come back to it.
No, we spent a lot of time 3 retreats ago on home ownership programs, and I think we,
The pilot came
hey,
out of
look,
that.
not everything works, but if we didn't try, I mean,
Agreed.
that's just my opinion, but if we didn't try, then we wouldn't know. I mean, we could just as easily be coming back asking the board for $10 million because it was a knockout success. So
Agreed.
I just don't want to spend too much time, more board retreat time, because it occupied a lot last time, and it just didn't work.
Cool. All right. Thank you very much. Anything from anyone else? Hearing-
Madam Chair,
Yes, sir.
according to the agenda, it's break time.
No, it's not.
No. Melissa goes first, and then it's break time.
So
And
here's
Marissa's
what
the
we're gonna do.
moderator.
Here's what we're gonna do, because this has been really good conversation. We don't wanna like cut everybody off and get as much out. Melissa's gonna start the multifamily programs update.
Oh, I
The
see.
coffee break is at 2:15, and we're just gonna bring it in, like, get your coffee. It's out there now, too. You can get it, come back, but we'll like take a quick break and then bifurcate and do preservation after the break. So we can
And-
kind of get back on
And by
track.
quick, don't look at the agenda. It might not be a full 15 minutes.
Yes, but we're gonna get started.
Okay, Melissa, don't feel bad, but I got to go now.
Go ahead,
Yes,
go ahead.
Exactly.
All right, Melissa, take it away.
All right, so we just have an update. We're going to have some differentiation in how some of your presentations of awards are going to look. So I really wanted to go through that and talk about it so that when we get to the board meeting and you see something different in your package and we present those awards, you'll have some background, and then that will facilitate all of that. But I wanted to, if you can pull up the first slide, Katie, the difference in the presentation has to do with our evolution of how we have continued to incentivize developments that have higher levels of ability to proceed. And so you can kind of see the bullets. I'll just quickly go through the bullets because I want to give you all some context, kind of remind you where we came from and where we're going next. So the first thing you'll see there is limited number of priority 1 applications that a principal can submit. And so, if you recall, a few years ago, we were having a lot of extensions, right? You had extensions on getting through credit underwriting, those firm commitments, loan closing deadlines. They were becoming very extensive. They were really the norm rather than the exception. And so the board really had some concern with that. And so under Marissa's direction, each year we've made some small progress in terms of kind of turning the ship and being able to incentivize those applications that have those higher levels of ability to proceed. And that first one there, submitting a limited number of priority 1 applications that a principal can submit, that was the first step. So we said, instead of submitting 10 applications in each RFA, Mr. Developer, you can have 3 priority 1 application submissions. And so that in turn, really, we wanted them to hone in on the applications that had your highest levels of ability to proceed, were the most financially feasible, met the RFA requirements to the highest extent feasible. And so you can submit as many priority 2 applications as you want, but when we get to that funding and ranking selection process, we're going to prioritize those priority 1 applications. Then the second step, we said, okay, you've got your priority 1 applications. We expect you to be a lot more lasered in on those applications that you're submitting. They should have higher levels of ability to proceed. Now that should translate into you closing your transaction by the deadlines. So then we said, if you do not close your transaction by those deadlines within the allotted timeframes, then in the next year's corresponding RFA, you would not be able to submit any priority 1 application. So that was sort of the next iteration. So if you applied in sale 205 RFA, you didn't close on time, in next year's sale 205 RFA, you can't submit any priority 1 applications. And then last year we evolved even further. We said, hey, we're going to test out a new concept, which we called our permit ready goal. We included a goal to fund a development in 2 of our 9% geographic RFAs that could submit an application where the site was at a point where they could issue the permits with just the payment of the fees. That could be the only outstanding item, and that had to be permits for the vertical construction of the building. And so in turn, if you got funded under that goal, you would need to be able to close, have your permits in place, and start construction within 6 months of your invitation to enter credit underwriting. So this year, as we geared up for this cycle, we had a significant amount of stakeholder feedback and interest in expanding that permit ready, what we introduced as a goal, into a different concept where it becomes more of a tiebreaker. So essentially, instead of we're just picking one development as a goal that's permit ready, now it is a tiebreaker where if you can meet all of the other tiebreaker, it leverages well, it meets the other goals of the RFA, they will cycle up to the top of the funding selection process. So essentially, we would be getting all of the goals that the RFA requires, still leverages well, but if we have a permit-ready application that can meet all of those, they would be at the top in the funding selection process. So we are implementing that into this cycle. We've workshopped it in December and April, and now through our various RFA workshops that we're running right now. We did cushion that shift in policy with the limitation that principals can only submit one permit-ready application that could compete for an award under that permit-ready title per RFA, so that we're not allocating funds to just a few select developers. If I got 3 developers that submit 3 permit-ready applications, right, like they could essentially kind of run the gamut on the awards. So we wanted to maintain the competitiveness of the process, and so the other part of that is there's a pretty hefty consequence. If they don't close, meet that 6-month time frame, we're testing it out in sale with a little bit different time frame, but on, let's say, 9% GOs, if they don't close in that 6 months and have their permits and can start construction, then in the next RFA cycle, they won't be able to submit any priority 1 application. So it's like if you're gonna come for this goal and you're gonna commit to it and you're gonna get funded because of it, you've got to be ready to go. And then that transitions us into the ranked waiting list concept, which is where we'll kind of talk about how the awards might look a little bit different. So the ranked waiting list concept, that really stems from a desire from stakeholders to see applicants that do run into problems during their development life cycle have an incentive to return that funding quickly so that we can redeploy the funding quickly. So if what would happen is a development would be invited into credit underwriting, and then maybe they find out they have a really big issue on the site. I don't know, maybe they have a sinkhole or something, and now they've got to go find a bunch of other sources or, that sort of thing. And so they would hold on to the award, trying to figure out the solution to the problem. And you might be 2 years, 3 years down the road, and there's still no meaningful movement towards closing the transaction or getting it under construction. And so in this scenario, our ranked waiting list, which again, we've been workshopping for this upcoming cycle, would incentivize someone who runs into a big problem to return the funding quickly rather than sitting on it and trying to figure it out for many years. So what would happen is if they, within the first 180 days, so they got 6 months from the time that they're invited into credit underwriting to return the award if they're not a permit-ready application, if they return that funding within that 180-day time period, then we would go to what we're calling our ranked waiting list. So all permit-ready applications would go onto the ranked waiting list. They would be sorted by all of the different preferences and tiebreakers within the RFAs. And so if someone returns that money within the 180 days, that money would pull up the next development on the ranked waiting list. And so that really incentivizes them to, number 1, be ready from day 1, because if you've got 6 months to figure it out, if you've got a problem or not, then you got to be ready to go. Then don't sit on the problem development. Give that money back so we can redeploy it quickly. And then if they do that, they would not have that limitation on the priority 1 applications in that following year. Now, what the developments that would be on the ranked waiting list are all eligible but unfunded permit-ready applications. And so you might say, well, why is it permit-ready applications? Well, we're saying if you're going to give us the money back in 6 months, we don't want to go back and start at ground zero. So we already had 6 months time. Now I'm going to go pull up a deal that, let's say, isn't permit ready, now we're really starting from ground zero again. Whereas if I'm pulling up a permit-ready transaction, that stakeholders invested a significant amount of time and resources to get that property to a place where it is permit-ready. So we would essentially hope that as we pull that funding up, or that development up into the funding range, that they would be ready to hit the ground running from there, and we're not losing more time with the funding. So when we present awards to you, and we're going to introduce this in our very competitive RFAs. So all of our GO RFAs are 9% GOs. Our sale 205 general occupancy RFA, we're going to introduce it in 213, which is our Live Local RFA, where we're putting out $100 million of that innovative Live Local funding. That's a very competitive RFA. So we'll introduce it there, and so you'll see the awards as you normally do, right? You have your recommendations for awards, and then there will be a separate kind of table of the developments that are on the ranked waiting list, so that if somebody returns the funding, the next development on that ranked waiting list that could be fully funded would come up into the funding range. And that is, yes, go ahead.
Yes. If the money refunded, okay, and is not enough to fund the next person on the list,
Yep.
okay, do we go down till we find one, or do we, add to it or something?
Yeah, we would go down the list until we could find one that we could fully fund. If there were none, that's when we would have to come back to you all and say, we have this return funding, whether it goes into the next cycle or whether it is a recommendation to add some funding or whatever the iteration could be. But if there wasn't one to fully fund, then we would need to come back to the board to determine what to do with that funding. And I think that was really, that was that part of the presentation. I just wanted to kind of remind folks of that evolution and, right, like, we have to balance the priority of, getting those funds out, right? Like, legislatively, folks want to know how are our units hitting the ground, and so this has been a process that we have gone through over the last few years to try to kind of turn the corner and being able to effectively, efficiently get those units built faster.
So I know that we had talked, and there was a lot of feedback about that permit-ready goal and that permit-ready tiebreaker. I know that there were similar conversations about self-source. Did you all make a final decision on what that might look like in terms of self-source priority, or is that still being workshopped?
Yeah, we will have the pot of funding for the self-sourced application, so it's half of the sale funding for the family demographic, so that funding will still be set aside for self-sourced applications.
Just add to Melissa's presentation, which she got us right at 2:15. Like, this is the pro, right? Like, Melissa is so good,
Melissa.
so succinct. The reality of why this is so important is because when we came through this past legislative session and we talk about the $150 million for Live Local now being non-recurring, we were getting questions from legislators who don't know deeply, and of course, how could they, right? How long it takes for development to go from, funding to residents in the development, and how fast the money can be deployed and actually expended. This is necessary to try to get to that point to speak about how quickly we can do this and how we can focus on that. And I think, like, Melissa's creativity in figuring out a way to meet that, yet also, it's not our job to make sure every developer gets a deal, but we do want to make sure we're not over, our portfolio doesn't shift to being all in one, certain type of developer's bailiwick. So it definitely has been a challenge. She's done a great job with workshopping it, but it is so vital. We were working on this before this past legislative session, but it really showcased how important moving in this direction is.
And so I also want to second acknowledging Melissa. I don't know if any other board members ever participate in some of the workshops. And Melissa, it happens in my job all the time, but you'll hear one person say one thing, and then the next person says the exact opposite. And it happens with every single thing that was discussed. So kudos to you for always striking that right balance between pleasing everyone while recognizing that it's not your job to please everyone,
but your job to make sure that our resources are allocated efficiently and effectively when there are very strong personalities that are trying to push you in different ways. So kudos to you on that.
Can we start again for Deb?
Deb, we
Hey,
just finished-
Deb, did you just sit down?
We just finished 2 hours
Missed you.
early, so.
All right, you got it all. All right, so I guess we are going to officially break, and then Melissa's coming back to finish up the preservation conversation. We'll roll right into strategic plan update and discussion with Angie, Marissa, and Bill, and then we're going to get to the very lengthy parking lot list of things that we did not get to in the interest of time. It will not include, oh, Deb's going to be first on the trust fall since he was late. Does anyone need to get up, or have we just been doing that?
I just did.
Well, I said that we could break and no one got up, so if no one's going to get up to break, then we're just going to go there.
Your chair position for when you were done.
Thank you so much. I'm done. 1 minute warning. You want to get out of here or you want to sit here all day? I'm cold.
1 minute.
I mean, everyone's had time. How long does it take to pee and grab coffee? You have to brew the coffee.
Yeah, but you don't understand. In the restroom, you're telling a whole story.
Yeah, they're reading a book in the bathroom. I don't. That's.
So you have to spend some time here.
You don't want to miss what happens at the end of a chapter. I get it. I get it, Ron. I get it.
That's why I go to Angie's office.
30 seconds? Just because I can't tell time very well?
Oh, yeah.
How do I know I'm at a Marriott? Because it's Pepsi. Because it's soda that no one wants. You said 30 seconds, Madam Chair.
I don't think so. I think I'm okay because
I
like
am
Ron.
still waiting on 2 board members. Angie's here, Marissa's here. We've got everyone. Maybe Mario or Reynolds really liked the book in the bathroom and they just want to wait for the end of the chapter. Oh, Reynolds did not like the book because he's here.
You're waiting for the end of the book.
What?
You're waiting for the end of the book.
Might wait a while. It's a long book. We're just waiting for Mario. But you know what? We come in and
I think
out.
we can
if
be
we can
in.
just continue to move on. So if I'm not mistaken, Melissa is going to do part 2 of hers.
Yes, the torch is passing from M to M. And, you know, we've worked on this and discussed this together really in conjunction with a lot of folks at Florida Housing over the past year talking about preservation. And I'm just double checking. Y'all can hear me, right?
Yes,
Okay, fine. Okay, so the point of this is really to give you an update because those of you who were at the retreat last year, we went over this in a more robust way. But, you know, this is a good reminder and it's very timely, particularly coming off of Schimberg's presentation of the rental market study at the last board meeting, where, Ryan, I know you had noted, you know, wanting to get some additional information on preservation specifically after that. So if we go to the first slide, Katie, please. So this is a reminder of your background here. When we say preservation, that's the practice of preserving existing affordable housing, right? And at Florida Housing, as our funding restrictions start to expire, it's taking units offline. So, you know, we've been in over 30 years funding developments and funding units that have these affordability restrictions, which have also evolved over time. And at the beginning, we didn't have as long term of restrictions on some of our developments. Now, most of our most competitive resources, we're talking 50 years affordability. In some cases, depending on the regulatory mandates or the legislation, could be 99 years of affordability. But what we know is we're going to be losing units, and you heard about that in the rental market study. If you go to the next slide, historically, before we really started looking deeply at this, we did what we would call like capital P preservation, which is looking at preserving affordable units that are not in our portfolio yet, right? So we have developments that we've funded that may be expiring that we have to talk about for preservation. But then something else that's really big for affordability in the state of Florida is developments with those older resources that may have HUD assisted or USDA RD restricted. So those affordability restrictions, and they were not financed with Florida Housing. So we do some, and have over the past few years, dedicated some portion of our resources to that capital P preservation outside of the portfolio, preserving the affordability and bringing those into our portfolio, okay? So we've done that, but we've known, okay, we've got this issue that's going to be coming up with our own portfolio. So if you go to the next slide, Katie, and I am going to be talking fast, but this is sort of getting to the background to get to the more fun stuff. In 2017, at the board's request at the time, we had our staff review the status of the portfolio properties. Nancy Muller, who was here earlier, was a huge part of that when she was a director of policy, as well as Laura Cox, our managing director of asset management. And they put together, they looked at, a lot of data. Again, and you heard how much harder it would have been then than it is now, and what I'm going to show you to look at. What are our risks? What are we looking at in the portfolio? And they presented a portfolio preservation plan that the board approved at the end of 2018. So that is an existing plan that we have. We talked about this at the last retreat. The plan has strategies and infrastructure, recommendations for us to look at to maximize how we maintain the most amount of affordability in our portfolio before restrictions ultimately go off. So we've got the Portfolio Preservation Action Plan. Last year when we talked to you at the board retreat, if you go to the next slide, Katie, we discussed the plan with the goal of educating you about preservation. So everybody knows all about this, Reynolds, except you. We're going to get you right up to speed. But what we did in the past year on looking at the plan, it's like, we could, it's not something that's easily done overnight, right? So we have a lot of other, things that are going on in the corporation. So we looked at some of the things that we could adjust that already exist in our process. So for example, the capital needs assessment process that we go through. That's really important when you look at preservation. How much do we need to put into a development to appropriately invest, and what that process is, and we've expanded that process. We also, over the past year, have looked at our replacement reserve process, and is that looking like it does in other states throughout the country? Are we meeting typical norms? When we look at the refinance of developments in our portfolio, because they do come back in for refinance and recapitalization at certain points, are all those things making sense and meeting what we expect them to? And in large part, I say without giving you the updated report, which we expect to do in future meetings, we feel really good about that. But the one thing, if you go to the next slide, Katie, that strategies in the plan that really need further development before we can move on are strategies that focus on ways for us to actually offer resources for that limited rehabilitation or full recapitalization for developments ending towards the end of their use restrictions. So we don't have like a pot of money for our own portfolio to say, hey, you're coming offline and clearly you need to get some rehab there. You're coming up on year 30, right? There's no magic pot of funding that exists for that. And for so long, we've been focusing on new unit production, and that's obviously very important as well. So what we understand is, also, just because something is coming on the end of its use restriction might not mean it's appropriate to utilize resources, especially if we don't have a ton of resources to spend on those, to fund additional preservation. So the development of how the strategies to use resources to fund preservation requires our continued review on what we call the conceptual matrix that looks at the criteria of priorities that are important to us in preservation, such as, the biggest example is, why would you want to preserve something in a market that you know if the affordability restrictions expire, it's going to become completely unaffordable because the market rents are that much higher than the folks who have been living there, who have access to the jobs that are nearby, the schools that their children go to, all of those things, right? So a lot of what we need to look at in that conceptual matrix is market analysis of what's important to preserve, because some locations there may be those use restrictions that burn off and it's not going to be an extreme change. It could sort of turn into naturally occurring affordable or workforce housing, right? So that's some additional analysis that we need to go back and look at. And it's also things like what other subsidies may be associated with the developments. Do they have contracts with HUD for subsidy and rental assistance? Do they not? Are they good players? Have they been having good compliance monitoring reviews in our portfolio? Would we want to extend something that doesn't have that? Looking at who we do business with in this preservation concept is really important as well. So this is like big stuff that I've just tried to jam in a few minutes, but the purpose of this is to sort of keep this on your mind and get you thinking about it, because we're going to talk about it in the strategic planning session a little bit later. If you go to the next slide, please, Katie. Oh, sorry, I didn't tell her to go to this slide, but this is basically what I just said. The strategies need further development, and this should make sense. We have to look at what we want to prioritize from a policy perspective, as well as where the location of the unit burn-offs and development, restriction burn-offs are going to be. And so if you go to the next slide, Katie, the where are we now? So in the past year, you got the taste of the Schimberg rental market study. This was, I went back and watched the board meeting, and this was a explicit chunk from the rental market study where Ann Ray talked a little bit more about the work that Schimberg does in looking at preservation. And by 2034, right, which is less than 10 years away, these many developments and units face some affordability expiration risks, and the largest group is third-year expiring Florida housing units, meaning units funded with Florida Housing Resources. And so this was information from the Schimberg rental market study. When they're looking at information on preservation, they're not only looking at Florida Housing Resources, some of which are mentioned here, but they were also in that presentation talking about assisted units, statewide. Like I mentioned, we're not the only ones that put affordability restrictions on developments.
So is our preservation strategy, while it's more inclusive than just the Florida housing portfolio, is it exclusive only to those developments that have income restrictions on it? Meaning, will there be any future consideration for either a developer or a property owner that owns NOAA, somewhere
Yes.
around the state, they've owned it for decades, they need to make a significant, they're now coming up, and I know that we had discussed this before, they're now coming up on how are they going to have the dollars to invest into making these 30, 40-year-old units look the way that they should. If no one is going to compensate them for it, then they're just going to turn around and sell to a market rate developer that can do whatever they want and jack up the rents. So will there be any consideration in any type of resources related to non-income restricted developments that would include NOAA, or for the purpose of our conversation, are we just focused on above and beyond, again, Florida housing units, but nonetheless income restricted either by a federal program or by a state program?
So the short answer is, this is what we are going to talk about from here on out, after I move from this slide, is specifically Florida housing assisted development, something that's got a Florida housing land use restriction agreement and funding or extended use agreement. However, the asterisk is the naturally occurring affordable throughout the state, well, NOAA, as some folks call it, is certainly important to a comprehensive review of preservation overall in the state. And when we talk about looking at our overall plan, it's in the ecosystem of it. But right now we're trying to look at, hey, we know it's sort of a balance of time, right? So we're going to focus on what we have in the portfolio and to hit some strategies that will long-term see us through as the years continue. but also getting to sort of an innovative approach and looking at naturally occurring affordable, which is a much, much deeper topic and target. So I'm going to put, that's not going to go in the parking lot, maybe in the long-term parking, the economy, out there, but yeah, but appreciate the question. So sorry, go ahead, Bill, yep. Mike.
Just want to kind of add, as in the future, we'll be continuing to talk and maybe revising the priority matrix. That will again kind of be part of the consideration, because there may be a particular reason in a priority that we may want to preserve housing in that, say, a particular area or a particular market where we may not have portfolio properties. But the key would be kind of protecting and saving our properties.
So obviously understood. We're going to look out, we're going to put on our own mask before we put a mask on anyone else. I
Yes.
get it. I guess the reason why I'm bringing it up twofold: one, because we're already having a preservation conversation, but two, I just want to get ahead of it, because to me it's only a matter of time. And Marissa, you and I spoke about some of the buzz from lobbyists already to the legislature. I would rather us be thinking about it and discussing it before the lobbyists of the property owners that have NOAA get in the ear of the legislature, and then we're having to play catch up because they've got their own ideas. We weren't necessarily encompassing that because we were focused on our portfolio, and now we're trying to backtrack or undo. So I just want to make sure, while I get why we prioritize what we do, that it at least is part of the overall conversation and plan, so that should we ever hear from a legislator on what we're doing, we're not saying, oh, we're focused on this now, but funny you should mention it. It is something that we've discussed.
Absolutely. Do you have something, Ron?
Yes. What's the restriction on bond programs, not only from us, but from other?
You mean the use restrictions, like how long do they remain affordable?
Exactly.
So we have generally speaking, in our program, and I'm going to make sure, this might be a handoff with Melissa still, some of that stuff just went right out of my brain, but 30 years, I think, if it's just bonds and 4% tax credits,
Right.
and that's the same, really, I say the same with a little asterisk. Local bond issuers, they could put anything they want on those, but usually they're coming in for 4% credits, so they're getting an extended use agreement for the credits with Florida Housing that's going to be for at least 30 years. Now, in those programs, there is and we do not have enough time, but if you'd like to talk about the qualified contract process at year 15 and how some of that plays into it, those are sort of exceptions to the general answer is 30 years. And the programs that have the more extended 50 to 99 years are the competitive resources. And we require folks to waive that right to qualified contract in the tax credit program in those types of developments. So if you can go to the next slide, Katie. So the point here is that we wanted to get across also, while the Schimberg data that you saw last session looks at all assisted affordable units in its preservation analysis, our Florida Housing Preservation Data Dashboard can show us what trends are for our portfolio to start making these informed recommendations for you for decision making. And so this level of detailed data analysis in conjunction with that comprehensive conceptual matrix of priorities that I mentioned will be critical to ensure that we are investing any available resources appropriately. And with that, I'm turning it over to Katie to go to and this is to be continued because we're going to talk later this afternoon about some thoughts on utilization of resources for preservation. But we're going to go to the dashboard, the data dashboard, just like David showed you with the HAP and Hometown Heroes program. Van, staff, and again, I hope his ears are burning the whole way home because so many of the things that we're going to be talking about today are because of that good work that the data management unit has been able to do.
Is that one of our developments?
That is not what here we go. Okay, here's the other thing I wanted to say. In the spirit of actually getting the information, if you want to stand up and go closer to read it, you're welcome to. I'm lucky because I have it here, and I almost want to Vanna White it for you, but not really, and I don't have a poker. But what you're seeing is the correlation of all of the data in our portfolio and the estimated what we call burn off or the end of the use restrictions by various, you can slice and dice the data in different ways. So I wish I could move with this mic. You have years and tranches. So the first tranche, that Katie has there is 2026 to 2029. Then you go 2030 to 2039, and it goes every 10 years, and you see the number of properties that are going to burn off and the number of units that are going to burn off. And if you scroll, like what you see on the very left-hand column, we're not going to go into this deeply, but I want you to be able to understand how deep we can get with the data. You see the differentiation between large, medium, and small counties. Okay, but cool, right? We fund a lot in the larger counties because that's where the greatest need is, and at some point, you see it gets really dark there in the middle, and that means that we're losing the most or have the most risk there. So sort of like that sort of heat there, you see that. Katie, if you can scroll down, the next it's a little more in-depth and important because you're looking, up a little bit, you're looking by demographic. So you see a differentiation between elderly, family, farm worker and fishing worker, homeless and special needs. Why is that what we track? Because that's what we are statutorily required to fund through the sale resources, right? So we are able to track that. And so you see those numbers, and again, you see where it really starts to become big. That tranche is 2050 to 2059. But when you look down in the family demographic, which is the second row, it starts getting a little darker there in years 2030 to 2039. There's some meaningful stuff. We're looking at 86 developments and 15,000 units, which is not insignificant looking in the next 15 years. So then if you scroll down even more, Katie, when we look at that next tranche, we can look at the area median income distributions and sort of the affordability chunks for below 35% area median income, which we refer to as extremely low income, generally speaking. That's the ELI units. And then and I'm sorry, I'm squinting, I've got it in front of me. The 35 to 50% AMI, the 51 to 60% AMI, and the 61 to 80% AMI. So we can go that deep as well. And what's important to know on that particular chunk is that first tranche from 2026 to 2029, so the last 3 years of this decade, we're going to lose ELI units in 84 units in 15 properties, right? So just giving you a way to, analyze that. Yes, question?
So, all right, approaching it with that part, and sorry for pausing at this part, but that number's important, that 35%, 30 to 50,
Yep.
50
Yep.
to 60, 60 to 80. So we have the immediate threat is these 80 units that we're talking about, 5,294 units. If we look at these in different buckets, and I'll put on my developer hat here for a minute with it, there's a portion of those 80 units versus the market rent that will satisfy another need when they come offline. So even though they're coming out of our portfolio, they may be checking another box for us.
Which is, that's correct in the sense that we need to see where they are and that criteria through the matrix of the market that we mentioned.
So
Yes.
what I was going to say, it doesn't seem like a huge lift to see how big this problem is, but the buckets that I'm putting it in are, you look at these 80 properties, what would the market rate rents be on those?
Mm-hmm.
Are they satisfying another need, either their current need, which I doubt, those 15, no chance, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, but are they satisfying one of these other needs, either affordable or workforce, up to the 120? And then when they fall outside of that is where I'm trying to get creative, is there could be a tranche outside of that where the deviation is a small amount that when you look at it from a cap rate standpoint as a market rate development, it could be a really easy buy-in for us. Like, it might take, hey, here's $1 million we're going to put a mortgage on, and this is your rent disparity, and we want it for 10 years to preserve it. That's an easy one for us. Or the other thing, if we want to get creative, is legislatively, maybe we could create like a middle market tax exemption for it, where they could not pay property tax. If that delta is their property tax amount, if it's $100 a month different, and their property tax amount is, you know, 25 grand a year, sorry, and I'm rambling and trying to track me, but we could satisfy a big tranche with a property tax abatement for that too, legislatively. And then the last one is where we need to me, it's an easy calculation, where, all right, this is the disparity between market rent and what this need is satisfying. That's going to translate to an annual dollar amount. That's going to translate to a cap rate. I mean, Dev, I'm looking at you. That's going to translate to a cap rate. That's a dollar amount. Is it worth, for the need this satisfies, doing it for $5 million and putting the position on? Do we have that money? Do we make an offer? Does the developer accept it? Yes or no? If no, move on to the next one. What are we funding with it? But it doesn't seem like this is a huge lift when we compartmentalize it that way, to look at 80 properties in short order and figure out which of those categories it falls into.
So you just did the perfect tee up for what we're gonna be talking about that and some ideas there. So now I have your buy-in already, and it was your idea to begin with. So this is great. But in actuality, there's something because right, it's simple, but there's some complicatedness to it in the sense of figuring out what's right for what location. So when you go down further, we're not going to get caught up in locations, but if you want, we can tutorial any particular county that folks want to talk about and look at. But if you scroll down, we also have on this dashboard each county where you can see the unit and development burn off. And the one that's really, if you scroll down a little bit more, stop right there, Katie, please. It came up in the Schimberg study overall, but Orange County, which I wish we had a red thing, but she's pulling the cursor across. When you look at that county, it starts getting darker with more units leaving in the second, decade. 13, go back a little more, in the 20, nope, to the left, yep. 13 units and over 26,000 units, 13 developments. So essentially more than anywhere else in the state. That's where we're gonna lose units first. And why? It's because that's where the biggest investment came in on the front end when these programs just started. So I'm not making any value judgment, just telling you this can guide us to the where in a really interesting way to then understand, what that looks like. We're going to try something. When you click on that, Katie, the 13 or orange, it should, if you scroll all the way down, and it tells, see, we can scroll and then navigate to every single development, if you scroll way down, where those units are falling off. So we have this really dynamic data that we can use to focus in on discussions. So the next thing I'm going to show you is...
Melissa, really quick before you go forward. I'm assuming that there have been some units that have, come offline, or where you were speaking to the developer. I mean, what type of incentives were they looking for, right? I mean, because it's all about incentive, right?
Absolutely.
So like, what kind of incentives were they looking for? And I don't know, what do we have in our toolbox now?
So it depends on the developer and it depends on the location. And some folks are coming to us saying like, I'm happy to keep it affordable, but will you extend my LURA so I can continue to get property tax incentive relief? We've dealt a lot with that. So we work with that. We're looking for anything that doesn't take money to put into it to be an incentive. So the extension of LURAs for that reason is something that we've done. Another thing that we've done is look at the ability for developments when they're coming up on that life, like they can't come back in and apply for competitive funding with us the way our current rules work, because we're basically saying like, you knew when you got funded, you got to keep up on it and maintain the asset, and you have your good replacement reserve, so you shouldn't need competitive refinancing from Florida Housing right away. On some of those where we have seen, especially in special needs, this has happened particularly, we've opened up the ability to allow those that do have the LURA to compete for funding. But what we're going to be talking about is the next iteration of, can we strategically look at some pots of funding to make a dual analysis. One, the buy down component, like you said, Ryan, where you've got units that you need to make the difference up in. And then two, where is it appropriate and necessary to look at options for like a wholesale recapitalization for a development? So we're looking at that. And I want to make sure we get into, we're kind of going to flow into this conversation, but the cool thing you need to see, can you go to the heat map, Katie? Hopefully it works. And Van was very upset we couldn't get this particular, there's like a pop-up on it. Can you make it bigger? So disregard the pop-up about the credentials because they can't figure, we have the credentials and we can't figure why it's popping up. But what this does is show you where, we're at risk in the state of losing the most units. And if you scroll down, it actually is animated and runs through, I wish we had a bigger screen. Go up a little bit. You see at the top left, 2030 to 2049, you see as that rotates each decade where the biggest risk of loss in areas are. So it's a kind of a cool tool to actually show what it is that we're looking at, right? So we have a lot more information and I compressed it. Yes.
Quick, can the board members log into this site?
No, not yet. We're not there yet.
May we though?
That's a question for Van. Eventually what we're hoping is this becomes public.
I'm
Like,
wondering
that's
in
what
the
we're working
meantime, can the
towards.
board members get logins?
That is, no.
Well,
And from an IT, we're getting there. Our goal is to make sure that we get, because this isn't perfected yet either. It's the same disclaimers that we had the last time. We're working through the data. We're making sure we feel really confident. Data is really powerful. I think we can pull anything for you, but it's not externally like a function, software that is externally accessible yet. Is that right, Angie?
Right, that's exactly it. So we're
Yeah.
trying to balance the whole system security and everything else that goes along with it.
so it's not because you don't want to give it to us 'cause
Correct.
it's preliminary, it's because it's
Right,
it's
we
housed
are
on
not
the internal
ready
server
to
that-
allow external
Okay,
users to
all right.
come in.
The goal is
Fair.
to get there, like
Yeah,
Van,
yeah.
like that, the goal is that, and that's why the data discussion is so important right now too, as you
Yeah,
can
yeah.
see, as we talk about this, like one of the things as a corporation we pride ourselves on is our transparency
Yeah.
with the data too. So if folks can just access this and see it, it's really important as well. So there will be more to come on this, but, I had to just cram a lot in a little bit. And Bill and Melissa, is there anything else you wanted to add till we get into the next topic? Again, what you're going to see, we're going to have more discussion on some potential ideas a little later today, but you're going to see some continued reporting. I know you mentioned, Ryan, that you were interested in having like an info item in each board packet that shows some information. So we're working on the right way to get that in the board package as well. Yes, Reynolds.
From my knowledge, because I'm a new board member, what do the developers usually do with the properties when they expire? I mean, do they usually hand them off to somebody? Do they sell them for a discount? Do they keep them?
It could be all of those things. So it depends on the owner, and it depends on the location of the property, and it depends on sort of their incentives or their mission as well. So you deal with permanent supportive housing, and a lot of those are mission-based organizations that are looking at ensuring that the property stays affordable and anything that they can do to make it that way. We fund some developments where it may transfer ownership, and so they may have sold, which is totally fine. We re-underwrite and look at any transfer of ownership, but they're just basically looking at the right way to make their own financial decision. Sometimes it's to sell, and sometimes it's to just increase the rents. It depends.
Yeah, I think the properties that are not like, stellar locations, they would want to probably re-up if they could. But I mean, so has this ever been done before? And, the idea, it would obviously take a legislative appropriation if we came up with a framework of what we would like to offer, and then we'd need to get some money to fund this, correct? Is that how it would work, or what?
Well, we're gonna come back to that because we're looking at the opportunity to figure out how to do some type of pilot and what resources might be available for that. And I think that sort of when you're talking about like naturally occurring affordable, there's been some naturally occurring preservation over time. Like we've seen and had developments come in and do a recapitalization at year 15 and extend the affordability even further and things like that. But, looking at a comprehensive approach for the portfolio, this will be the first time that we look at something like that.
Yes, in the past, we've approved refinancing,
Yes.
okay, on the first mortgage and extended ours for rehab. So that's kind of one way we've done it. Is there any other resource for just providing rehab dollars?
We're going to talk about that soon.
Okay.
Go ahead.
In a lot of developments, if they want to come in and they want to keep the property affordable over the long term, will come in and they'll utilize the bond program. So they'll get a local HFA bond issuance and they'll use the 4% housing credit. So we're consistently seeing re-syndications come in that way. I think what we're talking about now is like a more concerted effort to find corporation resources to target developments that may fall out based on certain criteria that we would try to look at.
In that case, we still can extend their second mortgage, program if they get refinanced through bond.
Yeah, if they have an existing loan, Florida housing loan, they would be working with asset management to work through those things.
If a board member wanted to not abuse staff time, but wanted to take some time to play around on this and see what's what, who would be the point of contact?
Always Angie is your first point of contact.
But if it's secure, it would have to be like screen sharing or something like that, because you
No,
can only
I
log
mean,
in through
no,
your
yeah,
secure
no,
laptop.
I mean, like similar to this. Yeah.
Or you could come visit.
Yeah. I just have a question. I remember a couple years back, or a few years back, Cornerstone sold a portfolio of properties to Blackstone, was it Blackstone?
I don't remember exactly who, but
BlackRock,
familiar.
one
Yep.
of the Blacks. Were those properties close to coming off their Lauras?
So that was a little bit, I don't know, I mean, Laura would know specifically, Laura Cox, if she was here, but my understanding is they were getting close to that period of time, right? And so part of that was also, and what's included in our portfolio preservation plan as well, when we look at things that are not just dollars related, was some releasing of use restrictions to higher AMIs. So those old developments that were just straight 60% and below AMI, some negotiation of, well, can we do a certain amount of units going up to 80% AMI as long as we get some ELI units where we maybe didn't have those before. So again, I don't remember it specifically. There's maybe other people in here that do, but it was that idea that they were going to do a sale. I think it was coming up on towards the end of their affordability.
Yeah, my concern there is obviously if they're picking prime locations of where those projects are, that those necessarily may not come back to us because, it's really kind of almost a predatory nature of acquisition for obviously the future value of, the properties.
I think that's part of the criteria and the way we're looking at prioritizing some of these things as well. Bill, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention regarding some of the things that, we're displaying as to the dashboard information is we feel real comfortable with what we show. When we're doing some of these more kind of unique types of things that we're looking to do with this Power BI, this may be just showing what we will be able to do. It may not be complete yet. So that's the only kind of warning that it is. And some of these things that we're showing, some of these things as we're kind of moving to the next levels of what we can do with this application, some of it may not be, fully ready yet. But we're real comfortable when we say, hey, this is exactly what we have for the districts, the legislatures, for policy with the dashboards. The only other thing that we've been thinking about as we talk about preservation is some of us who's been here around for a long time we have gone through phases of where there's an interest to use our finite resources for preservation, say in comparison to new construction and new production. It appears, and again, it's kind of more of a broader question, but it appears that, the board has been interested over the last several years and continues to be interested in, continuing the efforts and having preservation be, one of our models for affordable housing. I guess I just kind of wanted to know why the board's all together can speak on it together. Is that accurate?
I'm struggling with preservation at all, and reason being, I say exception, special needs elderly, because that's serving a very specific demographic. But from a unit standpoint, I'm looking at it where we're not creating new units by using money to preserve, and to solve the macro problem, the answer is getting more units in Florida, and capitalism will sort itself out from our supply and demand will sort itself out, reach equilibrium. So I'm wrestling with the idea of preservation in general. Initially, I started off all about it, but I'm wrestling with it because I think it's taking away money from more units, and more units is part of the answer. Is the answer? That's my 2 cents.
Well, I think it's location specific, right? If you're in, Miami, and you're in high income areas of Miami, and these units are coming offline, and we're not able to preserve them, you're forcing people out, of those areas. I mean, it could be, in other areas that are not, in that type of demographic where it just kind of wipes out the lower income, affordability of residents. I'd say that could work in some areas, but definitely in some other areas, I don't think that works. I think you have to try to preserve them.
So it's obviously a topic that even previous to our last retreat we had discussed, and it's hard to argue with Ryan because he's right. And so I'm glad that we're having this conversation, because going back to what I was saying about special needs populations, right? Like, our resources are finite. Yes, we need to build new units, but if we're losing units, then now we're just playing catch up. Now we're just playing catch up to that. Mm-hmm. So for me, I think it's really going to come down to that per unit cost. If we can be more efficient with that per unit cost in preservation, and say, 50 to 100K a door to preserve it, when we know that it's going to be way more on building new units, then are we able to leverage that in a manner where we're able to show, yes, we built 1,000 new units. With those same resources, we were also able to save 3,000 units. So I just want to make sure that as we're deciding, and again, I think it'll also come down to political will, right? Which is why I was saying earlier, we need to make sure that we catch up to whatever might be coming down the pike. Because from a developer standpoint, how much skin do they have in the game? At the end of their affordability period, it all comes down to subsidy. Either someone's going to subsidize it to keep it affordable, or they're going to do what any capitalist is going to do and go out to market and make it market rate. Mm-hmm. So I think that in terms of allocating those resources, if we could just make sure that we are preemptively making the argument on why we are committing these resources to preservation, and how that has that, doing that cost-benefit analysis, I think that we're going to be able to perhaps balance those two, and making sure that while we are continuing to create new units, that we're also using that low-hanging fruit to ensure that we keep whatever unit in our portfolio in a cost-effective manner can remain affordable, for however long.
So to wrap this up, because we are going to touch back on it in the next section, hopefully the takeaway for you is we haven't forgotten about this over the past year when we brought it up last year. We've done some good internal reviews and some due diligence on the things that are not money related, but the things like CNA, replacement reserve, updating the look at how the changes to the current property tax exemption changes in statute that impacts the portfolio as well. So we are doing all of those things. You're going to hear more from us, not just in the next session, but really to have the plan updated overall with some of these components. So I'm going to wrap that if no one has anything, and we'll go into the next item, if that sounds good, Madam Chair.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. So the next item, strategic plan update and discussion. So Angie and I are literally going to ping pong this across this big empty space, and with some chime in with some other senior managers as well. I'm going to start and just talk about the strategic plan process and the plan itself. As we mentioned in the beginning, hopefully you've seen the through line and the tie-in with the agenda. Our current strategic plan that we're operating under was approved in 2019. You have a copy of it with your materials if, to refresh your recollections, or some of you who may not have seen it and have come on, since then. But it is really comprehensive, and I think hits on all of the universe of things that we're dealing with at Florida Housing. You've also heard, and it's not to be confused with other unit or departmental strategic plans, like Bill mentioned. For permanent supportive housing, we have a strategic plan. For data management, we have that proposed 5-year strategic plan. So we're all about the strategies and getting in front of things at Florida Housing and trying to be really, thoughtful and proactive in what kind of things will impact our priorities and trends and conditions as well. So historically, and I'm going to look to Bill to chime in if he needs to or wants to at any point, but about every 5 years, we go through an updated strategic planning process, which is typical, right? A strategic plan is intended to be, every 3 to 5 years, you got to look back at it. It shouldn't just be a document sitting on a shelf. We're required to have that strategic plan as a part of our statute, and it's a part of our performance metrics. I believe that we, have to report back to Department of Commerce. And so, what we're looking at, and it's an interesting time, right? As even Sandra mentioned, there's like a lot going on, a lot of changes at the federal level from, policies and regulatory framework and funding, but ultimately, I think we still feel really strongly about what our priorities are, and it's necessary to review those things, even though, we're in arguably a little bit of a leadership gap too, but it's still important that we go through this process. And we're lucky that we have Angie leading us through this process in this time as well, and I want to acknowledge that. Like, her stability is providing us the stability to go through this process. So what the process is going to look like, that what you can expect, is we'll come to you in September. Nothing is an action item, really. We'll ask you for, the permission sort of publicly and talk about. We're going to go through the strategic plan process and what that looks like. Staff is already working on the draft document, and you sort of rehashing some of that. Bill's team is very in depth with that, especially the trends and conditions that have changed so significantly since 2019. And we'll go through that process that will also involve public workshopping of the plan in all likelihood. That's what's happened in the past as well. So again, in the theme of transparency, we want the public to understand what we're looking at and what our goals are, and that you all have the ability to look at that as well. And then ideally by December, and we don't have any hard deadlines on this, but this is just the goal of timing. By December, at the end of the year, you'll get a draft strategic plan to look at and take time with, and then we'll come in the first meeting of the new year, ideally with our request for the formal approval of that new strategic plan. So that's what you know what to expect, and so it won't be surprising, and we'll let everybody know. From a logistics, Bill, is that anything to add on that?
No, great job.
Okay, so we are going to get down to business with that, and I think the other thing I wanted to say is, if you look at the strategic plan and you think, this is really interesting, or why do we do it this way? Please do not feel like you have to wait to contact us. Again, if you want to do it through Angie, that's great, but really, Bill and I are significantly going to be leading this process, and if you want to have any discussions, with us about the process or about the substance of what's in the plan and how we're looking at it, please don't hesitate to contact us. And so that is really the quick part about that. Strategic plan and discussion. So knowing that we have, the existing plan and knowing what our priorities are, as we've discussed through, a lot of different components of them today, we also have another item to discuss. I'm going to turn this, pong it back over to Angie to take over from here.
Great, thank you. So this is really a discussion about what you guys have been asking most of the day. What resources can we put towards a lot of these initiatives? So we wanted to lay out all of these ideas for you, and then at the end, kind of talk about what resources we have. Before we get into kind of that part of it, I do want to address the unrestricted net position that we talked about. I can't remember if it was at June or when we did that item, but we said we talk about it at the retreat. Reminder that unrestricted net position is assets with no offsetting liability, right? Not all of these assets are liquid, and they're not things that you can use to fund other projects or initiatives. A lot of it is loans, it's fixed assets, it's things like that. And the part that is cash, we've already committed it to a lot of things like the viability loans and other just various initiatives, victims of domestic violence, that sort of thing. So there's not a lot there that is truly cash that's available. There was about 1.7 million in that big number for other programs. About less than $2 million was actual cash. Yeah.
That's not doing much.
No, and that was the thing, it's a big number that we look at that is these, programs and other initiatives, but so much of that is either a loan or already committed to be a loan or a grant or something else. So there's not a whole lot of cash sitting there. So that's not really part of this discussion. So I just wanted to make sure we touched on that. So a while back, we did kind of what we call a sweep the corners kind of initiative where we look at all of our different funds, both restricted and unrestricted, see what, as repayments come in, as investment income comes in and that sort of thing, what's available for you guys to use for other things. So back then, I think it was late 2023, we allocated the $36 million that David Westcott talked about to Hometown Heroes, and that went out in '24. We allocated a little over $50 million to Hurricane Ian RFAs, and then, or alternatively, to other disasters. Well, there's been a lot of federal funds that have flowed in, and we, to be cognizant of the capacity and not over flooding the market with these resources, we haven't really done any RFAs that related to that. And then we allocated $23 million to just continue to stay in reserve. So since then, we continue to receive repayments on our resources that are out there, loans that are getting repaid way back from the hardest hit fund after the financial crisis. We're still getting some of those loans repaid. Everything stays invested. We earn a little bit of investment income. And so now we're ready to talk about what can we do with these remaining resources. So you can put the chart up now. Or not. While Katie works through that. Earlier this morning, Bill talked about the generators and our initiatives. We know we have to do a pilot program to try to get generators into some of our existing developments. We would like to, out of the resources we have, set aside $10 million to do a pilot program for generators. We think it'll fund about maybe 20 deals, but we're still working through some of the actual logistics and understanding the costs associated with that. So I don't know, Bill, if you wanted to jump in on anything with that?
Could I jump in really quick?
Sure.
The disclaimer to this is all preparation for future asks. Okay,
Right.
so we're not asking you to vote to commit anything today. We're not asking you to vote to commit anything tomorrow. This is to educate you, get you thinking about this, understand we've been thinking about it, again, in correlation with our strategic priorities, And so it's not hard to ask, it's what we're thinking and sort of educating you about those components.
And generally taking your temperature
Yes.
on where we think we need to be heading. And yeah, that was kind of at the end of my stuff. That's fine.
They're so on top of it, I think they were like ready to go.
They're
with it,
you're
so,
like, yeah, we're voting for that. No, these will continue to come to you as we put together an RFA. We'll say, well, just like we do with the timeline, we'll come back to you and say, here, we'd like to go ahead and put out an RFA for this amount of money, and then we'll deal with it kind of as they come through. So yes, starting with the generator, we are thinking in the neighborhood of $10 million. The HAP down payment assistance, David talked about that. Our HAP money is looking to run out in about 18 months, assuming current conditions, right? We don't know exactly what's going to happen. We don't know what next year's Hometown Heroes appropriation is going to be. It could be 100 million, it could be zero, who knows? So at current rates and at current repayment rates, which include the current interest rate environment, we think about 18 months. Adding 25 million to this HAP would help us extend that. I don't have the exact dates in my mind, but it would help us extend that. And rather than trying to put it into something like Hometown Heroes, where it would be Hometown Heroes forever at that point, HAP would be serving a broader population, right? A slightly lower income, but a much broader population. And it's been a proven and very successful program. And like David said, 99% of our loans, over 99%, I think, get down payment assistance. So down payment assistance is critical to our single-family programs.
Angie, can I ask
absolutely.
a quick question? Going back to the generator pilot.
Yeah.
Can we get a better understanding of why staff is looking at generators for our entire portfolio as opposed to just special population? And I ask that because every Floridian, except for maybe Ryan, knows what it's like to take a cold shower and get everything done that you need to get done before the sun sets in the days and after Wilma, 2 weeks after the storm. So certainly for the special populations, yes, obviously we don't want seniors to go even a day or any other special population. But I'd like to better understand why we wouldn't just focus on our special population portfolio and we would want to require it for our entire portfolio going forward.
One thing first, and thank you, Ryan. We didn't have a lot of time to spend on, talking about the pilot, but to clarify regarding the eligible expenses and how we would be looking at this, it would be more about powering essential services such as elevators, emergency lighting, the clubhouses. It wouldn't be powering the units
So I was
themselves.
like, I want a Florida housing unit. I mean, I have friends that have generators, but we can't get one on our property. And if
Because that was a,
Okay, so
that
for the
was
con- okay, that makes
a little piece of information I
Right.
left out.
No, that's yes, helpful. But for our special population, would that would be for the whole building, or that would still also just be for elevators and lights in common area?
Yeah, it would just be for the essential services, power in the elevators, safety features, the clubhouse or the common areas, a place, and again, really from what we've learned in some cases, it may not be, hopefully they can then, stay in place for a little bit, or really what it does is it gives access to emergency crews to be able to keep things powered in the common areas, like for appliances, for charging phones, things like that. So it's more about emergency types of things. And not even after disaster, we find with elderly and special needs, just from even, short-term power outages, the importance of having those things powered makes a big difference.
So at the risk of having someone throw something at me that might be sitting behind me, and giving the caveat that I could make the argument against it before I even bring it up, was there any consideration when the legislature passed a law requiring assisted living facilities to have generators? Was there any consideration then by special population staff to perhaps consider requiring the legislature to do that as well for our special population portfolio? Or did we look at that differently because that's typically a for-profit business, whereas we are a lot of times working with nonprofit providers?
Not so much, and without saying this is really a disclaimer, because I think a lot of providers and a lot of folks from emergency management to advocates for special needs and elders, what tended to really kind of move the legislature forward with the nursing homes and the assisted living facilities was after a significant event
Yes.
that,
Very, very close to my
so,
heart. Yes, I
and there, one legislator and some others have been interested, especially in elderly and special needs, even after tornadoes, things like that, where they're saying there's only going to be some major event that's going to then push it into the independent housing for seniors and permanent supportive housing, if that answers your question.
Thank you.
Angie,
Yes.
this is what, not in any particular category, but the total amount is an annual,
No, this
This
is
is for
a
for
one pot of
several
money. That
years?
is, yeah, and once it's gone, we'll try to make more, but
okay, this is for however many years it takes.
yes.
Are we budgeting for maintenance as well? It's one thing to buy them, it's another thing to maintain them. If you don't have ongoing maintenance, they break pretty quickly.
That's a very good point to consider.
And they cost, I mean, it's huge money to maintain. Like, I have generators on my places, my personal residences, and it's expensive to maintain. And then if they run for a while, the expense of that fuel, I mean, if you have a 50-unit complex with a generator running, you will burn through thousands of dollars a day in propane or gas for that.
And one of the things we're considering, also with this, really looking at retrofitting in built developments is the additional cost that it may be also to kind of retrofit in the installation of generators, everything from installing fuel tanks to other, upgrading the electrical systems and things like that. But that is a very good point, Deb and Ryan, as to kind of the ongoing maintenance.
Okay.
If you want to give some context on the due diligence that you guys have already done looking at this, it'll give the board a good idea of sort of where we stand and kind of hope to go.
Yeah, so we just did some very preliminary research. We found that a lot of developments are already putting generators in their developments without us requiring them. We found, I want to say generally costing somewhere between $100,000, $300,000. So as we run, a pilot, we're thinking, right, like we want elderly and special needs. If we're gonna have a limited amount of funding for developments that we're gonna retrofit in our portfolio, we want to get the most vulnerable population. So we want to serve elderly and persons with special needs. And so we would essentially run basically like a conceptual workshop and say, here's what we've found so far. Now let's talk to the stakeholder community, gauge the interest, start really kind of honing in on, what types of requirements, those types of questions, right, about costs, future costs, maintenance, those types of things, and kind of start to get down into the nitty-gritty before actually coming to you and saying, allow us to run what we'd probably determine, a world of developments that could participate and issue like an invitation to participate. So it's not a competitive thing. It's like these developments in this world could participate. We have enough money to fund them if they come in and want to utilize the funding for that purpose.
How many developments do we have that are PSH or elderly that do not have generators currently?
Do you know that, Bill?
I do, but I don't have it with me. We've done a number of surveys immediately after, you know, the hurricanes, but since this, with doing the due diligence, there's a significant amount or more than we thought of the elderly developments, existing developments that have the generator systems and have had it. The permanent supportive housing developments, not as many.
I think numbers for how much of the problem is $10 million solving and how big is the problem would be helpful.
And one of the things too, we were looking at, you know, from a pilot perspective is also, as we do with our pilots or demonstrations, also be able to, you know, learn ourselves as we go through the pilot. Kind of as Melissa said, one of our next steps in our due diligence is really kind of also, we've started talking to some of our credit underwriters and our servicers as to kind of the specific cost and how do you go through the process of, if say we would do an invitation to participate for this, how would we go through the process then of doing the credit underwriting and doing those. Yes?
So the idea would be to use one company to install all of them, right? And they'd all be the same product, they'd all be, I guess, attached to natural gas, and you would have some kind of process where the maintenance crew would test them every quarter or something so that we were sure that they were going to go on? Because, I mean, the worst thing to do would be to install it and then somehow there's a failure and then you're trying to go back to the person and you've got all these mad people.
One thing we'd have to look at as to, you know, there's like the state building codes, and then each local government may have, you know, their own requirements or ordinances. There'll be what we found in kind of doing our, and this is more like large single-family homes, you had different providers, different companies. We had various specifications they had to meet based on the size of the development, kilowatt hours. But we found that it was very difficult unless we did a very specific pilot, location specific, that we would have to kind of leave a lot of that up to the actual property owner.
So as long as they met the specifications, they could go out and find their own company. They would provide all of that documentation. Like, we would give them a list of documentation that they would have to submit to prove out. And then we would say, we'll give you up to this amount of funding for the generator. When we did the grant generator, it wasn't the entire cost of it. They had to chip in some money. But I guess in some cases, in that instance, it maybe covered everything. But generally, they had to put in some money for it.
And I think part of our conceptual workshop will also see what the interest will be also.
Yep, Bill, you never know when you may need these. So I guess credit underwriting is going to have to figure out what the cost number is. And I'm not sure how they'll do that, but I guess they're going to have to plug in some number for maintenance and costs.
Yeah, I think that will be part of the process and part of the thing that we'll need to workshop to really talk to the stakeholder group in terms of, you know, cost of the overall generator, kilowatt hours, and then yes, the cost for the ongoing maintenance. So I think that those are all topics that we would need to cover in, you know, a conceptual type workshop.
A broader than just surveying, like, you know, properties and working with the owners and developers
Well,
regarding.
Staff gave the disclaimer that this is just the precursor to the conversation.
Yes.
You may not ever have to use it, but you may have to use it 10 times in a year. You just don't know.
And that all goes to the crux of why we're not making an actual ask today, is because we know we have a lot of work to do but we want to be able to think through having a pot of money that we can go ahead and deploy once we do the rest of this due diligence, so.
To Sandra's point earlier, are we going to prioritize the special populations?
Yes, in the retrofitting, we would only make it available for the specialized demographics and elderly.
Okay.
Okay, moving on down the list. You just heard a really good discussion about preservation. And we are looking at, as we work through this, the preservation program, setting aside about $20 million and then $10 million for ELI buy down. And Marissa, I see her moving towards.
So the differentiation here is looking at, am I on? Yes, okay. A preservation pilot for the preservation of actual development, recapitalization, redevelopment. And until we can come to you, and this is not going to be right away, but the idea is we look towards the locational criteria we have for the data of where we're risking losing developments in the portfolio, and then the comparison to the matrix of priorities we have, the markets that they're in, the sort of the who that's behind the developments, some other really important things that we would flesh that out and really come to you with an updated recommendation, probably before we would even publicly workshop anything, right? We just want you to have this in the back of your heads, that we want to work up some type of pilot framework to think about what are the type of developments that there is this need that nothing else can solve, right? We have lots of tools in the tool belt that can address certain things, but we believe there are some that we are at risk of losing where they need more substantial resources. So looking to develop some type of pilot for that. The other piece really gets to what Ryan mentioned, where we have this ELI preservation unit buy down. So in some of our developments, because we bought down ELI units at the beginning, those units are going to burn off, and they burn off in 15 years. So they'll turn into 60% and below AMI units, but that's a significant amount of extremely low income units that we need, and we want to look at some type of pilot to address exactly what you said, Ryan. What does it take? What is the delta to buy down those units to get some more, not let them burn off and get some extended affordability for those lower AMIs? And so these we imagine being two separate type of pilots to develop, one being very unit buy down specific, which arguably will also allow us to learn more from even beyond ELI units, right? So on developments where maybe it doesn't take a full recapitalization, but there is some type of unit buy down program, we can explore that as well. But we really want to look at those ELI units, because in many of the developments, and jump in where appropriate, Bill, as well, some of those units will be linked units for persons with special needs, right? The reminder in all of Bill's information, our permanent supportive housing approach is not limited to funding developments. It is extended to setting aside the 5% of that 10% for every development. And so where we're at risk in some of those, like we want to have a thoughtful look at creating something as a strategy for that. So those are the two separate, again, very high level, but expect us to be coming back to you with some suggestions. And then I think it's probably fair to say with all of these, this is what seems reasonable for now.
Right.
As we drill down more, that assumption or those numbers may adjust. And I'll turn it back to Angie to talk about that more.
Well, and one more thing about the ELI, a portion of the funds that we have available out of this pot of money are repayments from a federal program that we had quite a number of years ago, and they do continue to carry, at least as we lend it out one more time, they have to be for ELI type units. And so that's a good fit with this ELI buy down, and some of it may actually fit up into the generator pilot as well.
And so those ELI units, it can either be in a special population development, or it can be allocated to just the 5% set aside units in a regular FHFC development?
Well, we would look at what's burning off the quickest and look at what those developments are. And generally, you're going to see that buy down in general occupancy developments
Right,
because,
because we didn't start the special
Correct,
population
correct.
until more recent.
correct.
Angie,
Yes,
so we're looking at $90 million,
right.
okay, for these allocated funds for the next budget year,
For the next, depending on how long some of these.
however long it
Yes,
takes.
yes.
But
however
we're
long
going to
it takes.
budget it next for, you're
It
going to
would
budget
not
it?
be in the operating budget. We'll bring you these as we develop an RFA. We'll say, okay, remember we talked about this back at the retreat. Now we'd like to go ahead and put X million dollars into this RFA.
Okay, so,
And the same thing, we'll have to bring you an item for the HAP, but
so it's not going to be in next year's budget?
you won't see it in the operating budget, no. Because we don't budget the program funds in that way. That's strictly operational. So, and of course, the last category, because as we've been saying, the landscape is changing all the time, right? And so we want to go ahead and hold about 25 million of that in reserve. It may end up in one of the other categories as we come to you, depending on what we learn. Something new could come along. There could be a disaster that we're not prepared for. And, you know, given with what's going on at the federal level, the states may have to pony up a little bit more for disaster relief. So we may end up needing it for that. So that's why we wanted to leave some of it in reserve for whatever comes up. Are there any questions about any of that? Okay, like I said, you know, not an ask at this point, just giving you an idea of what we're thinking and, you know, kind of taking your temperature on them. If you think, you know, let us know either now or later. Like, no, I think that number is completely unreasonable. I think it should be this. We'll certainly take all of your input. So, that's it.
Okay, well, I was going to say, Sandra's not here, and we're getting into the
she is.
parking lot territory
Sure is.
now, so.
All right, so parking lot, we handled the generator, so yay, we finished that. So on my list in no particular order is to discuss, which I think is really important, how all of this changes as the feds move away from the Housing First model, both in general, but specifically with our PSH developments and any type of vouchers that anyone relies on to live in our communities. We have, under that same sort of umbrella of strategy, how the homeless executive order will impact the behavioral health RFA that we are looking at. The school children pilot that Ryan wanted to bring up. I don't know if we need to go back to job training for PSH developments, but that as well. Data points on the wallet card. Next steps for the homeowner pilot program, preservation we talked about, and then I also had on there, again, sort of going back up to where we started, was for CDBG-DR, if that's a program that also might be at risk going forward with some of the changes at the federal level with HUD. We could, maybe let's start with housing, maybe let's start with just a larger conversation about how staff is, I guess, feeling about some of the changes up in DC and how that might impact what we're doing.
Okay. Well, one of the first things in the One Big Beautiful Bill that passed recently, there's some really cool housing things in there. The expansion of the 9% housing credit, the lowering the 50% bonds test to 25%, a great opportunity for us to stretch our bond allocation, but when you lower that 50% to 25%, there's still a gap that has to be filled. And so I've been talking to a lot of the other states, and we're talking, I know Melissa and Marissa are both involved in working through how we implement that. And I know some states are looking at implementing it in stages, taking it from, 50% to 40%, and then, on down to whatever makes sense. There's potential impacts into the price of housing credits. When you suddenly have more 4% housing credits out there, what happens to the pricing? So there's a lot that needs to be worked through on all of that. So we're working through just trying to figure out how to do that. I know for home last week, the Senate Appropriations Committee approved level funding for home, which is good news for us. However, the House approved zero. So kind of like it was during our budget session with Hometown Heroes and everything else, we have to wait and see what happens with that. And folks are definitely advocating at the federal level on trying to get funding into these. And then, of course, just the other day, there was a Senate bill that moved out of committee that, since it's so brand new, it has a lot of housing impacts in it. I've read one quick summary on it, so more to come on that one. So, and I know Bill can probably address some of the impacts to some of the other parts of the budget bill.
Yes, thank you, Angie. And, you know, we knew there would be really good analyses and work with our National Association and our other HFAs on housing financing and affordable housing impacts. What we kind of did on the other side, because it was education impacting, may impact education, may impact services, may impact Medicaid. So we started to do kind of an in-depth analysis of the One Big Beautiful Bill Act and what that means. And I guess the best answer so far is we're not exactly sure. We're working with our other state agencies and see. In some things we don't see, you know, where that impact may be, and again, it may be positive or it may be a little adverse. But in the questions regarding some of the recent, you know, legislation regarding homelessness and special needs, and in particular behavioral health, we think at least, and I don't know if this is a complete answer, but we think at least, again, you know, kind of our philosophy and our priorities and strategy around permanent supportive housing and housing stability and keeping people from homelessness is, you know, a good model. We don't really cover the resources, again, around sheltering or transitional housing or getting folks off the street quickly. But we think, and again, learning from what was done, say, after COVID and some other things, because there was a need to get homeless people out of shelters and off the streets, that we've learned that some of those really quick kind of strategies aren't being able to be sustainable now, because it was just really looking as kind of a quick fix. And now we're finding that in Los Angeles and some other areas who looked at everything from very quick motel conversion, hotel-motel conversion to just very temporary housing, is now those people are still in those settings, but now the providers, there's not the resources to continue. It's just, so it's like we're looking at, again, how I think from our stakeholders and just all our researchers look, is that it's not the only tool in the belt, but I think based on kind of our resources and our ability with our programs and our funding structures, is that seems to be one of the good models to continue to stick with and figure out how can we serve more of those folks that are being impacted right now.
That rural OZ legislation where you get a 30% cost bump and, you know, there's no recapture of depreciation on the opportunity zones, and there's a 50% instead of 100%. I mean, that's a real tool in the toolbox for some of these that fit into a rural opportunity zone. And, you know, any kind of encouragement for that, like you said, the motel, that's a perfect example. Retrofitting a motel and you got the 50%, you know, I mean, there's just a lot of things that if you can stack on the LIHTC and all this other things that can make it a really good deal, so.
Yeah, and I'll say we had a workshop for our 213 RFA, and we actually had a public comment from a stakeholder to encourage us to look at incentivizing developments in those opportunity zones. So I think that probably fits right in line with what you're saying.
But for Opportunity Zones 2.0, have those census tracts already been decided upon, or no? I mean, I know that the focus is on more rural areas, but have those census tracts already been?
December 2026, they're going to redo the census tract. So it's not, you're still under a 1.0 right now, but I think it's the December 2026, they're going to redraw, and some of them are going to be killed, but, you know, if you meet the, you know, the lower income requirement, which most of them do, I think it's like 22% that'll be killed, so.
All right. Ryan, do you want to get back to your school children pilot question?
Florida's. School children.
Florida's school children pilot question?
Yeah. So we're back to Santa Rosa. And what was the other county now?
Bay County is a possibility if the
Bay.
school district, yes.
Okay. Can you talk to, because I mean, I go back, this was one of my first board meetings when the original pilot for Santa Rosa went. Can you give where we currently are with the homeless school children program and give the 2-minute version of what it is so the new board members understand?
Yes. The Florida Housing Stability for School Children program is where we initially focused on small rural counties because of the lack of housing, affordable rental housing, as well as kind of the lack of some of the supportive services in the small rural areas and the communities. What we did is school districts came to us from those rural counties and said, hey, is there anything that Florida Housing can do to help with the rental assistance to be able to get our homeless school children under the federal homeless education program, their families into housing? Because we can only assist with meeting the schools, keeping that homeless child educated and getting the same, you know, the same opportunities as a housed student. And you can imagine with not being housed or stably housed, how challenging that is to be able to get a good education and have the same opportunities. So, you know, we talked internally and, you know, spent a lot of time, you know, with David and Angie and others early on saying, how could we support this? We're not service providers, we're not the school district, but we can provide the rental assistance if possible through the federal home program and the tenant-based rental assistance program. But to do that, again, as I said earlier, we wouldn't just be helping these families by getting them in the door because, again, they became homeless because of significant issues. So we said we'll provide the rental assistance if the local communities, including the school district and supportive service agencies, would provide intensive wraparound services based on what that household needs become more stable, and then improve, you know, their employment opportunities, their income, resources, and so we started a pilot, and Santa Rosa was one of the, in fact, who's now the superintendent of that county was one of the champions, and so we said that what we would do is we would have those partners, meaning the school district, a case management entity, possibly the homeless assistance services lead agency, as well as the public housing agency, agree to partner on behalf of this program. And the importance of the public housing agencies were because in most cases, they were administrators, or they are administrators of Section 8, HUD Section 8, which is very close to the administration of Home TBRA. The difference is with Home TBRA, it can be used up to 24 months. So the tenant-based rental assistance is limited, and a household can only use it once. They can't like use 24 months, come back and 2 years later and get another 24 months. And so the goal was, again, it's not the whole tool in the toolbox. It was one other opportunity to assist families that and households that could kind of pretty easily step out of homelessness or not go further down in homelessness with this short-term assistance. And we found it very, to the point it was like kind of unbelievable, the outcomes, both for the families, but also the children, in providing that housing stability and the wraparound services. So we turned it into a pilot, and then later we turned it in, established it with the board's approval as being a program. We had an RFA and added another 3 counties, Alachua, Hernando, and Charlotte counties. Again, from studying, it's very, if I can say, it's very labor intensive because you're working with a lot of local community that we have no authority over for them to commit and to keep everybody on board, other than we have a contract with the PHA to administer our home tenant-based rental assistance. We were looking at also as the program that local entitlement communities who receive their own home allocation could also do this in their communities. So that's really where we are at right now. Last year we had 2 counties for different reasons. One was the school district, the other one was the public housing agency decided that they wanted to not partner in the project anymore. In the meantime, we've had other counties, interested in it. And we've kept it we started at 100,000 counties with the populations up to 100,000. And then we have expanded it to 400 population of 400,000, again, with looking at our limited resources and also looking at kind of the strong need. And most of those counties do not have the home entitlement or some of the other resources. So we're at that point where, again, as I talked earlier, we're kind of lessons learned, and it's challenging, but when it works extremely well. And the challenge is just kind of keeping everything collaborative. And then we had the issue of during COVID and post-COVID is that the rents went above the home limits. So even with the PHAs, if they had units available, but again, the rents were above, the landlord's rents were above our home maximum limits. So as I said earlier, we're looking to add 3 other counties. We've done some due diligence. We have, in many cases, you'll have 1 or 2 of those local partners interested and 1 not. So it's really a lot of work of educating and making it clear what their roles and responsibilities are and are not. What we've done is limited to up to 25 households to be served at any time. That was really more from not only looking at it from a resource perspective early on, but in these smaller counties, that was all that the case management resources available and the housing stock could handle. But that's just a number. That's just what we came up, but it's not. It's really based on those factors: resources, capacity by the local stakeholders, and
when we didn't cap it at 25, what was the anticipated need as far as the number of families that need this?
It varied in areas.
Like, let's pick Santa Rosa. If there was no cap of 25 families that we were going to serve, how many families were identified?
In the range of 25 or less. Again, because
question is, you say now we're capping it to 25 families because that's what can be served by the infrastructure available. How many families were identified in Santa Rosa County as serving, this need would serve, forget the cap. How many families were identified that this was the issue, that the kids were homeless?
Yeah. At least 100.
Okay.
Identified that would make sense, because the other thing is you have to be careful is make sure that those households, there's a good chance that they can get up out of homelessness.
Yep.
Because if you take them out of the homeless system, when they're done with their 2 years or 12 years, they have to wait 6 months, I believe, Zach, 6 months before they're allowed to access homeless services again. So it's almost a disservice. So the ones like that specific group that can kind of, those households that pretty much with strong assistance have a great chance of coming up out of homelessness, they were saying around 100 households, between 80 and 100 households.
Ryan, do you have more questions? You
No,
might.
no.
Okay. So a few questions for me. Do we define success by families that stay housed through the pilot program, or do we define success as that homeless child improving their educational outcomes?
It's both. It's the
So
homeless children's
I'm assuming we don't. I'm assuming that the provider is tracking the students' educational improvements now that they are stably housed.
Yes.
And we get that information, and we could then use that to tout the success of the program.
Yes.
Can I assume that the families that are participating are homeless based on HUD's definition and not the McKinney-Vento Act definition?
It's because of, we work through the school systems and through the homeless education program where they kind of screen and initially screen. It's through the McKinney-Vento.
Really? So our resources can go to homeless by the McKinney-Vento definition. We're not restricted to using the HUD definition.
Yes, we go by the broader state definition.
That is fantastic. And then are we able to, the way that we were able to quantify the value of PSH versus a chronically homeless individual that cycles through the ER and the jail, is there some way to quantify impact? And I know that I'm really reaching here, but is there a way to quantify impact by future aptitude of students now that they're sort of back on track? I mean, going back to what I said earlier, like, I got into this because I realized if you do not have a safe home, no other prevention, no other intervention is going to be successful if they are not housed properly. So if do we require our providers to track outcomes in a variety of different ways?
Yes.
And then do we capture that as a way to share with the legislature? Again, when we're out there talking, going back to Ryan and advocacy, that we're able to tout these pilot programs, not just from a housing perspective, because I come across legislators all the time that frankly don't care about housing, but might really care about education or school children. So for us to have sort of a menu of talking points based on whatever that legislator is passionate about, now that we're making sure to contact Katie before we do that, do we have do we have those data points where we're able to articulate the value of that above and beyond just what we're passionate about, which is the housing piece?
And what we're careful to do is that we utilize, and the school districts require that we use the data that they must collect for the federal programs, which includes most everything that we're interested. The other thing that we do also is we track with the case management entity and the PHA and just other ways is track that success of that family not re-entering into homelessness, greater employment. What we see with a lot of, and I don't want to generalize, but what we often see is mothers with children, and because of having to care for their family, what we're seeing is they'll have 1, 2, or 3 part-time jobs, and the kids go with them, either to sit in the hotel parking lot while they clean the room, and then they go on to maybe a Circle K. It's that one of those things is kind of being able to provide that stability so those kids can get to school, the mom can work, but also working with the local program, the successful ones, there's other partners that help that family in that community, bankers, employment services, things like that, to help hopefully that mother get a full-time job with benefits and a regular salary. So that's just one example, but that's kind of an example that we see a lot.
So going with that, and we've never even discussed the fiscal cliff for another time, another day, but once that mother hits that fiscal cliff and is no longer eligible to participate in our programs, I'm assuming we track that as well. Meaning if someone if someone leaves the program within 2 years, we're able to discern whether or not they left the program because they were able to successfully skill up and job up to where they no longer qualify versus they fell out of the program for any
Right.
number of reasons.
And let me put a disclaimer on that, because the program's so young and we've had kind of the instability of the programs, is that, we wish we had more complete data because of having a broader sample, but the answer informally is yes. It's just and the one thing that we talk about, I think we talked about before, is this program has really been surprising when it works really well, but it takes a lot of effort kind of with those local partners. And, I believe, as Ryan had mentioned a couple years ago, is addressing some of our, challenges is we don't have authority over some of those partners that are key. So it's all based on, working with them, providing technical assistance. If there was a way to kind of overarching kind of collaborate all that, that's what we're finding.
So in your mind, what would be like maybe the top key things that would allow this to become scalable and successful?
I think one thing, and this is, something that it's just a fact, it's a recognition that if there was capacity at that local level, especially for the case management and the intensive case management and the homeless services, and even with the homeless school children, because they have liaisons and school workers or social workers that help put all this together. And like in Hernando County, we just heard about a month ago that they're concerned about, being able to continue in Hernando County because they're losing funding for the homeless education program. Therefore, they're going to have to omit 2 positions that were dedicated to this particular initiative. So I think it would be kind of making sure that the resources were there in all areas, as well as kind of an emphasis, as it is with Florida Housing, with the other state entities who may oversee.
So it's basically, the local, the local community, education, housing authorities, whatever, if their ducks are in a row, then we're able to scale this up. But if it's not, then, we offer this for you, but you got to get your house in order before you can take advantage of what we have to offer.
That's the hard truth sometimes from our perspective, because we're kind of leading this, and we think it's excellent program. And
do we have any data on how critical the wraparound services are to the success of the program? And by that, I mean, that's been the number one hindrance since day one. Otherwise, at this point, this board would have rolled this out statewide to all the, it's a no-brainer. You're getting kids off the street. So, but what I'm wondering is, it's all been based on the buy-in of those wraparound services, which guaranteed are going to provide a more successful outcome. Is there any pilot or data information on doing this without those services? Because it would be a lot easier to roll out if we didn't. So if we just opened it up to say, there's a program identified by the school superintendents, we have a housing authority or agency in every portion of the state, I believe, right? Like, to some degree,
Yes.
some more active than others.
The Panhandle, they have a
Right.
regional.
But then when it comes to the other services, such as like the budgeting and those things, which that's more complicated to bring that component together, more agencies, more everything. So if we had a program that was just, hey, schools identify, there's a program, fill this out, 2 years worth of rent, here's what the deal is, finance that, don't include the wraparound services. Although it won't be as successful, it might be a lot easier to roll out statewide. That's where I'm going with it.
I would think, and of course you want my honest opinion, you don't want just my opinion. But I think, again, from everything that we've learned, I think it could be successful for some, but not for many. I think it would kind of be almost like a Section 8 program where it would continue because the resource, what the goal is with the services, and sometimes it's minimal and sometimes it can be pretty intensive at the beginning, is that it helps give that household the skills, the services that they need, the attachments to be able to then actually then stay out of homeless and move out of say, what we've seen. They either move into the Section 8 program, but many of them end up renting, their own house after 2 years, or even in many cases, like Santa Rosa County, with the intensive services, within a year, they were saying, we don't need your rental assistance anymore.
Which is awesome.
So I'm not saying that it wouldn't be a possibility. I'm just saying probably it wouldn't kind of meet the intent of.
Understood. And it could be used for other purposes then, just people looking to, there would be abuse of it more so as well. 2 more questions.
No, please go.
Very brief. One is, just by way of example, the one that we're looking at tomorrow, what is the cost per family on that? I guess how much money is it we're allocating tomorrow? And I know it's for 25. Is that right?
Well, actually, because last year we came to the board in the fall and said, when they said the PHA didn't want to continue their program, so we needed some extra funding because they were almost out of their original funding to continue the rental assistance for the existing families. So that ended up being 18 families that were left at that time. So let me see if I have that here.
Yeah, what's the ask tomorrow, dollar amount?
And the requirement is the family has to contribute to the rent. And that's for these families that range from like $92 a month on up to like $600 or $700 a month. And then the home tenant-based rental assistance.
500 for tomorrow's ask. 500,000.
Thanks.
Yeah.
For how many families?
25.
Thanks.
Up to 25.
Okay, so $20,000 a family is what we're looking at. And then my second question is,
And that, may I just, Ryan, just to explain the 500,000, and David, if you need to help me here, the 500,000 isn't per year. What it is kind of like, it's a budget for, and we have found that 500,000 for, say, 25 families has lasted about 3 years. Yeah, 2.5 to 3 years, depending on
20K family.
the program.
And then my other question is, are we providing any type of reimbursement for any of the wraparound services, or we're not? Okay, one quick follow-up question. If we were funding them somehow to partake in this program, would there be an increased ability in them participating?
If we were able to get those resources, I don't know if it would come from Florida Housing. That's an answer that I couldn't.
Okay.
I'll just quickly jump in and say that I absolutely love and adore this program, and it came up in conversation when we first started, and I told everyone point blank, I was fundamentally opposed to funding supportive services out of our budget, because philanthropy has the opportunity, especially with all the leverage that we're bringing to the table. There could be no excuse from any provider across the state, and I'd be willing to go toe-to-toe with the CEO of any organization that provides supportive services, that they could not get philanthropic grant dollars or find funds from somewhere else
Cover that gap.
to leverage
Yeah.
all of the dollar, not just that we came up with the pilot program, not just that we're providing facilitation amongst all of the partners. I definitely think that it needs wraparound services in order to be successful. But I think, I don't care where you are in this state, there are philanthropic dollars available,
Yeah.
especially because we bring so much leverage to the table, right? Like, as someone that's read way more grant applications than I care to admit, there are other opportunities. I think most providers would push back and say, oh, well, we can't do it if you're not giving me money. And if so, staff, you can have them call me, and I will remind them that it is their job as a nonprofit to solicit funds for their programming, and that we are doing them a favor by providing the leverage opportunity with the housing, which typically for a nonprofit provider in that space that's already doing that work, it's the housing subsidy that they desperately need. And they would tell you, anyone that's high functioning and not making excuses, would say that they can provide those wraparound services. They just don't have the funding for the housing, because as you very well know, rent costs way more than the wraparound
anything else.
services.
Yeah. All right. Thank you.
The interesting thing, if I may add, in Santa Rosa, as you were saying, Sandra, the Milton government officials in particular, because there's less available rental housing on the coast in Santa Rosa County, and it's going to be more in the northern parts of the county. They were not satisfied with not happy with the Public Housing Authority when they chose to, because they felt it was such a benefit to the county and the community, and again, it was saving other resources to do that. So they were the catalyst of bringing the Public Housing Authority back into the partnership and agreed to continue to support and help facilitate that partnership continuing.
So I want to be conscious of time, because this conversation stands between everyone and happy hour. Ryan, any more questions?
No, thank you.
Any questions from anyone else? Okay, so we're going to scratch that. Ron, I don't know if you had anything that you wanted to add for job training for our PSH developments.
Yes. I just want to bring up that in the past, when we did supportive housing, before we got an increase in sale dollars and other resources to support these type programs, we didn't have a lot of projects that were submitted that they could make financial sense out of, because they needed that extra dollars to make supportive housing work. And my concern is in the additional, because, I mean, we're getting the extra sale dollars this year, okay? I don't know what's going to happen next year. It goes back in front of the legislature. Whatever we get, I don't know, but my concern is maybe we should do more this year for those type of projects, whether it be, I don't know, add to the percentage we use to set aside, or put some kind of incentive for extra points or whatever for this type of housing, because I'm afraid in the future, without this additional funding, okay, that these projects are not going to work financially. So that's, what I'm concerned, that's what concerns me.
Well, Angie, if you can confirm, and certainly you've heard it here today, that when you bring a recommendation before us for additional funds that we have, that your recommendation is always prioritizing either a pilot program or some of the special population RFAs.
Yes.
Yes, okay. So, I mean, at least as long as I've been on the board, anytime there's been extra dollars, we've always allocated those to either our pilot programs is synonymous with our special population RFAs, but I agree, while we have the resources, let's put as much of those resources to this as possible.
Right, and if you recall, I don't know if it was when we got this extra money, was when you got on the board or afterwards.
You're welcome.
But prior to that, we did very few projects for special needs because they couldn't make the numbers work.
Right, right.
So
Which I think
that's
increasingly
my concern.
we're gonna see. I agree. Anything else related to that?
Yeah, well, in the pilot program, okay, that I kind of encouraged David to get done was...
Cam, can you hear him? Because he's not as loud as me.
I'm sorry, I'm a little hoarse. I've been talking too much, maybe. Anyways, what we came up with is, from my experience in building affordable housing, it's very difficult if you're a smaller builder, and that's what you'd have to do to take some of these infill lots. You'd have to be a smaller builder. It was impossible to get construction funding to make this, to do it. So the problem was, what do? You can't get construction perms because these people don't really qualify, and you don't know, even if you get them to qualify, they buy a new car and then they don't qualify anymore. It's very difficult. So you have to kind of build it and they will come kind of thing. And that was the reason that we kind of did this particular project, to see with a nonprofit on lots that were given to them to make them work. So I just wanted to follow up on, why we did it with David. And it seems after a whole lot of issues and situations that it did work, and we should consider doing it again. And whatever's left, this nonprofit can reuse after they used, the down payment assistance. But there's no, next year may be a little soon, but maybe in the future, we may consider doing more of that.
So, we fund Florida Housing Coalition for a lot of the TA. Does any of that TA include specifically to smaller developers that Ron was mentioning, in any effort that they might have to be connected with banks, credit unions, anyone that might be able to provide them with more creative financing than a large developer would find from a large bank?
Probably not. But
That's why I'm asking.
well, when I was doing it, I was able to fund the construction funds myself or through a bank, but I got like 65, 70% loan to value ratio.
Right, I asked it because I get those questions as well from small to medium size.
It wasn't loan to value, it was
Right.
loan to cost, which is a huge difference.
Of course.
So if I didn't have the ability to come up with a difference, okay, I couldn't have done it.
So does the coalition provide any TA to small to medium-sized developers that might help them with creative financing
They
tools?
provide technical assistance and some training. Now, again, if the resources are available, but yes, they do, and they often work also if local government or nonprofit, those smaller entities, want to come in for the pre-development loan program to help with some of the pre-development loan costs. We hope that they go through a feasibility analysis first to see if it makes sense for them. And, but yes, the answer is it can be either something that's just scheduled on the agenda, or if they can request
Do something
specifically.
Great. Anything else, Ron?
No, and I'm not suggesting we do it, I'm not suggesting we do it, continuously. I'm just saying we need to relook at it in a couple of years.
Absolutely. Okay. All right, so crossing that off, I think that we covered data points on the wallet card. If we could just find out where those numbers are coming from, so that if someone wants to ask us about the numbers, we don't say, I got to get back to you. We talked a little bit about next steps for the homeowner pilot program. I don't know if anyone else has any additional questions, or if we just covered that. Covered it? Guess I should be looking to this side too. Larry and Mario have been quiet. They're done with today. Preservation we addressed. Okay, I think we finished all the parking lot issues. So we have 6 minutes for open discussion and public comment. I'm going to turn it over to Marissa or Angie.
I think you can open it up for public comment. There is a microphone there, and if anybody would like to provide public comment, just please, your name, your affiliation, and historically, we've done keeping it to
It'll be fast.
a minimum amount of time. Yes, go ahead.
Hi, Shannon Nasworth, CEO with Ability Housing and also representing the Florida Supportive Housing Coalition. And I know it's been a long day. I've been with you the whole time. This is going to be my last time getting to do this with y'all, so have fun. But I really just want to say, I was thinking about when I first started with all of this and interacting with you guys a billion years ago now. And I sat in my first rule workshop wanting to represent ELI and special needs households, and was informed by members of the workshop that we weren't allowed to serve those people. We were only allowed to serve 60% AMI, and we'd get in trouble with the IRS if we did that. So to sit here and listen to your all's commitment to ELI and special needs and homeless and persons with disabilities, it is remarkable how far Florida Housing has come. I hope you realize the degree to which your staff is so integral to all of this success. I mean, they have always been right there. Other states are so envious that we have an HFA that is taking the lead on trying to do this. Most other states, the service organizations, their HHS agency is begging their HFA to come to the table. Florida's backwards on that, and we're very blessed, and that's why we have thousands of units of supportive housing. There's still a ways to go, but the progress we've made in the last 10 years is really demonstrative, and I just want to thank all of you for your commitment to this.
Great, thank you so much.
May I?
Yep, of course.
Shannon, what your organization has done and made these projects work is unbelievable. I'm not sure how you do it or how you did it, but congratulations to you and Ability Housing.
Thank you very much, Ron. That's very
Really,
kind.
these are very tough projects to make work.
And I will say to all of the board members, especially the new members, we were part of the Pilot 1.0. We saw 30% less expensive to the community to house people than it was to maintain their chronic homelessness prior. If you ever want to visit a property, if you're not in our area, we serve Northeast and Central Florida. We know people around the state. We'll happily hook you up through Katie with somebody to do a tour of one of the properties.
All right, it's working. The system's working.
If you want to learn more about supportive housing in general, have conversations about the executive order and all of the joyousness that is going to be flying out of DC, we're here as a resource to all of you, and just thank you very, very much for your commitment.
Great, thank you. Any other member of the public? Going once, going twice? Okay, then I will close us out by echoing what Shannon said. Thank you to staff, thank you to Angie and to Katie and to Marissa and Melissa and David and Bill and everyone in the back that wasn't called up to the hot seat. Thank you to all of our board members that came in yesterday and to those that joined us today. And other than that, even though I didn't bang the gavel to begin, I am going to bang it to end. We are not here tomorrow. We are in the hotel that we are all staying at for our board meeting tomorrow morning at 8:30.
West